Well, good morning, gentlefolk. I'd like to give you all a very warm welcome. It was a pleasant day when you came in this morning, so a warm welcome on a warm day. I think you'll be chucking it down with rain by the time you leave, but let's hope not. My name is Howard Greenman. I chair the Strategic Planning Committee and will be presiding over this meeting today. Can I ask you, please, to make sure all your devices are either turned off or to silent throughout the duration of the meeting? Can I also just check that you can all hear me okay? Because there have been some issues in the past with our tech and so on. You can all hear me, please. So, a bit louder. I'll try and direct it more clearly into the mic. Thank you. If there is a fire alarm, we're not expecting that. Please exit the building via the nearest exit. There'll be the two access points at which you came in and congregate on the grass in front of the building. Please note that this meeting is being recorded today and broadcast live to the Wiltshire Council YouTube site. All documents pertaining to the meeting can be accessed on the Wiltshire Council website, as you're probably aware. I will now formally open the meeting. We do have some apologies today. We've got apologies from Councillor Pip Ridout, who's been substituted once again by Councillor Richard Britton. Always good to have you with us, Richard. Thank you for coming along today. We also have apologies from Councillor Jonathan Seed, and I don't think we have a substitute for him as yet. We do. Okay. Just going to ask the members, have you seen the minutes of the previous meeting? Are there any issues with the minutes of the previous meeting? I know that Beth, Councillor Threlfall, you did raise an issue earlier.
Yes, I wanted to propose an amendment to page 12, the fifth paragraph down. I thought it should read, in addition, it was pointed out that Wiltshire Council was unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and that our last local plan was adopted in 2015 and is now out of date. I thought that would be clearer than the current thing.
Sorry,
I can give it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
So you do have that, Tara.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, I've got that. Thank you. Okay, so we can approve them with that amendment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're happy with that?
Yep.
Yeah. Are members happy with that amendment? Yes, okay. No dissenters. Right, thank you very much. Well, with the addition of that amendment, I will then sign the minutes off at the end of the meeting. Thank you for that. Declarations of interest. I know the two we have before us today are quite contentious, but do we have any declarations of interest pertaining to these? No, none at all. Not here either. Thank you. There are no chairman's announcements, except that, safe to say, before you all go home, or just in case there are those of you who leave before the end of the meeting, probably specifically to the officers and to the members of my committee, I just want to thank them for bearing with us, with me, for over the last 4 years. This will be the last Strategic Planning Committee before the elections, of course, the last one of this electoral cycle. It doesn't seem any time at all ago, but we were doing battle over the Westbury Waste Incinerator. And here we are 4 years later with these two before us today. As a committee, you've been a delight to work with right across the spectrum. I'd like to thank you all for bearing with me too over the last 4 years, and our officers. And I'd like that passed back to any others that have been with me, been with us, that aren't today. Thank you very much indeed. And I do wish you all well over the next few weeks as well. It'd be good to see you all back. Thank you. Yes, Adrian, Councillor Foster.
Yes, I had a question I wanted to ask before we got on to the subject matters, if that's possible. But I'd also like to say a big thank you to you for running this committee in such an efficient and a very human way. It's much appreciated by us on this side, you know, that we're dealt with sensitivity.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Appreciate that. Thank you.
The question I want to ask is regarding MPNF and our present situation with the land supply, which has just been mentioned. In the last memo that we got from Nick Thomas, it mentioned that we had 2.03 or 2.04, quite a small amount. But also the MPNF that has changed a few times since last autumn.
Yeah.
And could we have a clarity of understanding, really? Do we still sit in the position whereby if the present local plan, which is going before the inspector at the present moment, if it goes through, will we have the 2-year grace period? Because there seems to be seems to be two messages on this. Some are saying that we will fall into the system whereby that will work for us. And some are saying the new MPF says, no, we must have a system that's in place at the moment. And I believe they're going to change the rules as well, in that the way new core plans are produced can happen within 18 to 30 months, which is going to be an interesting, as it's taken us 11 years to get to this point with the one we've got at the moment. So I'd like some clarity on the position that the government have put us in as to where we are at the present moment. And are we working at the present moment on a new plan? Because obviously even at 2 years, this one won't, and when the 2 years is up, we're going to be in the same position. So I'd just like some clarity on where we are and what we're doing to improve the situation.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Foster, appreciate that. We did touch on some of this at my chair's briefing yesterday, but I hesitate to put you on the spot, Kenny, but
Perfectly
it's not
fine,
all the
Chair.
detail that Adrian's asked for there, and I understand why.
Yep, absolutely.
If you
Thank
can
you,
come back
Chair,
on
and
that,
good
please.
morning, ladies and gentlemen. So there's multiple questions there. I can't respond to any future changes the government might make to the MPPF. For the last several years, we've obviously seen revised MPPFs on a yearly basis. The recent MPPF, as revised in December last year, that reintroduced the 5-year test. So this council were benefiting from the transitional arrangements that the previous government introduced, which allowed for a 4-year test for councils that had an advanced local plan at Regulation 19 stage, which we are in. Now, that transitional period disappeared when the government changed the MPPF in December. So we're back to the 5-year test. We're back in the scenario of having to have a 5% buffer. Next June, that buffer will have to be 20% when you test it against the housing delivery test changes that the government has also changed. So the combination of the reintroduction of a 5-year test and a change to the housing delivery test, which is a complex scenario, but in simple terms, what it means is the council has to calculate on a 3-year basis what the net delivery of housing is. So it's not just a case of approving housing. We need to demonstrate that they've been built, and obviously they're deliverable because they've been built. And then you divide that by the requirement that the government sets for this council in terms of housing delivery. That's the housing delivery test in a nutshell, but it is a complex set of calculations that have to be made, and in that there's also a test for affordability which comes into the equation to come to a requirement. So in the papers today, both reports refer to the current situation that we're in, and as you say, Councillor, we are in a deficit situation because of the government's changes. We were previously in a deficit, but with the introduction of the 4-year test, we were over the 4-year period. We're now against the 5-year test, and we've got a significant shortfall. That word significant is used time and time again by inspectors. It's not just officers saying to councillors, we think it's a significant shortfall. Inspectors are telling us it's a significant shortfall. And that is a material consideration for all decision makers, whether it's committees or officers, when we've got decisions to make. So the 2.03 is the current position, tested against the current MPPF and the housing delivery test, which is covered in the report as well. So it is a material factor. The emerging local plan at this stage can only be given some weight because we haven't gone through the examination on all the sites that are being put forward by this council. But there is an item on this agenda where officers are pointing members' attention to that there is a site that the council itself is promoting for housing delivery. That's a material consideration, and it's for you members to decide what level of weight to give to that material factor. So, in a nutshell, we're in a 5-year test scenario. We've got 2.03 years. Inspectors are telling us that's a significant shortfall. And I would also, you referred to a briefing note, Councillor. There's also the action plan that this council put forward several years ago when I think we first went into deficit. That's also a material factor. And the council were promoting sites that weren't in conformity to our adopted plan, but where there are no major constraints, we would look favourably upon those if they were considered to be sustainable and deliverable and help us out in terms of the housing supply situation. Because like it or not, we need to have a solution, otherwise we'll be continually fighting developers on sites that are not plan-led. I hope that answers the question, Councillor.
I can't agree with you more about your last comment. We need to have a solution. My concern is, if the inspector does approve this local plan, does that put us in any advantage over where we are at the present moment? Because the suggestions that even if it's approved, the 5-year rule will still apply, and we don't have this transitional period that we thought we were going to get for 2 years.
That point, I mean, obviously that hasn't been examined yet, so we don't know what the inspectors, and there's 2 inspectors for our emerging local plan, we don't know what they have concluded. They've made a start in terms of looking at what we've put forward, but we don't have that advanced knowledge in terms of what they might think about certain sites that this council has put forward for development. Sitting here, we certainly are hopeful and confident that all the sites that are in our emerging plan are sound, deliverable, and they should remain, but until an inspector looks at them and confirms that they are to be retained, we're not at that stage yet. But if we get over the line and that plan becomes adopted, then that's a new sort of line in the sand, and we will be, in that scenario, having an adopted plan, hopefully with sufficient housing to meet the government's requirements. But as I said to begin with, if the government changes things, and if they're doing it on an annual basis in terms of changing the NPPF, who knows where we're going to be at the end of this year. They may well introduce something else that we have to take into account. But we can only assess applications on the basis of what we know the current NPPF says, and also the PPG, which goes alongside the NPPF. That's equally relevant because it adds more sort of technical information for decision makers in terms of making a balanced decision.
And the one part you haven't answered, are we actively working on a new plan so that we can overcome this problem?
I wouldn't like to say no. I think the strategic planning team are concentrating their minds on the emerging plan because there's an awful lot of work to do to get it through the examination process. It's an enormous amount of work. They aren't yet, they might have some provisional thoughts in terms of where we'll go after that plan when we get it through examination and through adoption, and they do recognise that that is going to have to be part of the discussion with inspectors to convince them that we're not just going to get this emerging plan over the line, but have a other plan in mind in terms of addressing the shortfall, because there is not going to be enough sites in that emerging plan to meet our needs when we test it against the government requirements. So I would stress again, it's not because of Wiltshire not failing to meet the needs of housing, because you just need to look back through many years of housing deliveries. We were 125%, 116%, many years. But the key test is deliverable sites. And the Storage Road appeal decision in Westbury last year, that inspector criticised our assessment on deliverable housing sites. So it's not simply a case of the council approving housing. We have to then convince inspector at appeal that those sites are deliverable, and that's no easy task when you've got a landowner saying, it's not going to be deliverable, the site's not going to be enabled for development for 2-3 years in the future. So there is a mountain to climb, councillors, and all officers would say to you to make assessments, bearing in mind the scenario we're in with the housing land supply, and our emerging local plan will take us a certain direction, but there is an awful lot of work to be done in terms of delivering sites across Wiltshire. And there is a slide that I think Gemma will touch upon in her first item, which we've used it previously at this committee, that just shows the current situation in terms of housing delivery. So previously it was about 1,900 on an annual basis. Because of the government's changes, it's now 3,500 as a housing requirement across Wiltshire. That's the local housing need. So local housing need is not settlement-based because of our core strategy being more than 5 years. It's county-based. Unfortunately, because we know some settlements have taken a much larger hit than others. And I don't need to tell you, councillors, because you've sat here often enough and seen those sites come forward. I thought that answered your question, councillor.
Thank you, Kenny. No, you've been very kind in indulging me and giving a very precise and accurate result.
Councillor Threlfall.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, Kenny, I mean, because of the way these figures, the targets, the housing delivery test are calculated, the problem is it relies on the developers actually developing, doesn't it? Actually building out. And so to some extent, we are limited in what we can do as councillors. We've already got 19,000 outstanding planning applications which are not being built. But all we can do is sort of approve more to try and reach this target and encourage developers to develop. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, councillor. I mean, the light at the end of the tunnel is getting this emerging local plan through adoption, because that will then set a new benchmark. Hopefully the inspectors agree with all the sites that we are putting forward as a council for future housing delivery, but it's not going to be enough because the housing, as you said, the key part of the housing delivery test is how many houses get built, and then you divide it by how many we need. And that is set by the government. It's not locally set, unfortunately.
Yes, thank you. You both touched on an issue that I raised yesterday, because I think passionately that the government are going after local authorities for delivering more planning applications, for delivering more sites, and they should need to be going after the developers for not building them out. When you consider today that we've got around about 19,000 planning applications approved, which developers are sitting on, just land banking, I just don't think that's good enough. And I think the government's focus is absolutely in the wrong place. But that's where we're situated today. If I was in a position to do so, I wrote to Michael Gove over the 5-year housing land supply, as you know. I'd like to write to our government about this issue as well, because I think that we're being held heavily to hostage over this one. And I don't like it.
Can we move a motion to ask you to do that?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I feel passionate about that. Thank you for raising that. Appreciate that. So I'm going to now run through, excuse me, how I foresee the public participation today before we go to our first case. So in a few minutes, the planning officer will present their report. The planning officers will present their report and explain their recommendation. They may invite comments from other officers if appropriate, and we're well supported by officers today. I thank them for being here. I'll then be asking members of the committee to indicate if they have any technical questions they need to ask of the officers. And at that point, we will proceed to public participation. Now, typically, up to 3 speakers, objectors and supporters are able to speak for up to 3 minutes each. I'm not too fierce about the 3 minutes, but if I'm doing this, you'll know that I'm winding you down rather than winding you up. And so I won't let you run on ad infinitum, but I'm anxious that you should get your point across. Following the public slots for objectors and the supporters, there are slots for statutory consultees, and we do have those here today too. We will then hear from the formal representative from relevant parish councils for up to 4 minutes, and we have those here today also, and I thank you for coming along. After the parish councils, we'll then invite the local unitary member for the application to speak, and we also have least one of those and probably two in the fullness of time. Thank you too. I will then open the item to debate. I will ask the first committee member to speak to move a motion which must be seconded. Officer advice may need to be taken in relation to any motion, and at the conclusion of the debate, I will then proceed to a vote. The process will be repeated for each of the two applications we have before us today. Is everything clear? And you could all hear what I was saying, so that's good. Thank you. To members of the committee, we do have just one, under planning appeals and updates, we've just got the one there. There's very little really to be said to that one, if anything at all, but I would just ask you to note that one. That's in train, that's in process at the moment. On that note then, I'd like to thank Gemma for coming along. This is the third consecutive meeting she's coming. It's almost an old hand at this. Thank you, Gemma. I'd like to move to you, Gemma, if I may, for our first item, land north of Melksham Road in Holt. Thank you.
Good morning. So this is an outline planning permission for up to 55 residential units. All matters are reserved apart from the access. So here you'll see the site outlined in red. It's outside the limits of development. This site again shows you the application site in red, and in blue, so south of Melksham Road, is a site that was recently approved at appeal for up to 90 dwellings. I think it's important to note at this point that there is a Holt neighbourhood plan, but it's more than 5 years old and therefore is not considered as being up to date. So there is a conservation area and several listed buildings in Holt. As you can see, the site lies some distance away, and therefore it's considered there wouldn't be any harm to these heritage assets. While I've got this plan up, the council's landscape officer initially objected to the scheme, but has supported the revised plans. He concludes that there would be some harm as a result of this development, but sufficient mitigation is now proposed to reduce this harm. So the only harm that would remain from a landscape perspective is mainly the change from a field to residential development. This is the constraints plan submitted by the applicant. We've got some water mains on site. We've got, which is these blue lines. We've got a Wessex water facility here to the right. We've got an existing field access here, which is to be utilised for the main access into the site. This red area here shows a 15-metre buffer, which has to be applied to the water facility. And just here on this side, we've got two residential dwellings, which are the closest dwellings to the site. So one up here, and then there's one down here. And again, this site to the south is the approved appeal site. So this is the illustrative master plan. It's not being approved today, but does show in principle compliance with the Wiltshire Council policies with regards to parking spaces, biodiversity net gain, on-site play, SUDs, and the access. We also have a landscape strategy. Internally here, we have a 3-metre wide cycle stroke footpath that links up to the village of Holt. And also around here is a new bus stop and utilises the existing crossing. For the top here, we've got possible orchard, we have swales, the site uses the existing landscape features such as hedges and trees and enhances them with new features. Holt Parish Council requested that their existing village gateway, which is located here, is to be relocated, and that is shown on this plan, so it will be relocated up here. You can also see that this site is set back from Melksham Road. So the existing hedge along the front will be translocated slightly behind, with a footpath behind, and then the houses. So we have a priority control T-junction. This is in place of the existing field access. And here you can see the internal footpath that links up to Holt. The speed limit is to be reduced to 30 miles an hour and will start up here where the village gateway is to be relocated. I think it's important to highlight that the appeal site here, the inspector considered Holt has some good facilities and good public transport for such a rural area. This is a close-up of the pedestrian crossing plan. So as you can see, this is the internal footpath, links through the hedge to utilise the existing crossing. As detailed in my report, the Parish Council have raised a number of highway concerns. We have been in close contact with the Parish Council. We've also had a meeting. I know the Parish Council would like to see a roundabout that would access both this site and the southern site of the appeal. However, that appeal site saw access approved, and therefore this isn't able to be changed. Highways have also confirmed that roundabouts only work when all arms see equal vehicular movements, which would not happen in this case. The Parish Council have also raised concerns about the removal of a toucan crossing, which was also here. It was initially proposed, but the revised plans have seen the removal of this toucan crossing, and this is due to further discussions with Highways, where it's been demonstrated that toucan crossings require a minimum of 50 pedestrian crossings an hour, which this application would not provide. There's also been concerns with the state of the existing pavements within Holt. As this has not been caused by this development, it would fail the legal test for requirements of a Section 106. The Parish Council have also requested speed cushions, chicanes, speed monitors, all of which have not been considered necessary as a result of his application on a Class 2 road. We've got some photos of the site. So this is the Melksham Road. We've got Green Parks here to the right, which is where the appeal site is to be accessed. This is from Melksham towards Holt. This is the existing Wessex Water facility. So we've got the site just tucked in here behind. This is 227 Melksham Road. So this is the closest dwelling to the site being here to its right-hand side. And again, this is 227 Melksham Road here in the distance with the site in the foreground. The applicants have submitted an illustrative street scene. So again, here you can see 227 Melksham Road with the dwelling set behind the translocated hedge. Although not being assessed during this application, the agent has identified that the site would see predominantly two-storey dwellings. So here are some illustrative drawings showing that. So this is the table that Kenny was discussing earlier. So under the previous local housing need allocation, this number, and this is under the revised housing need calculation. So as already confirmed, Wiltshire Council is in a position whereby, due to the recent changes in the MPPF in mid-December 2024 and the changes in the way the housing land supply is now calculated, we are unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore paragraph 11D of the MPPF is engaged, where the decision is now based on a tilted balance. The site is contrary to core policy 1, 2 and 7, but is not contrary to any other policies within the Wiltshire Core strategy and has been supported by statutory consultees. There are significant benefits which are detailed in the report, which include affordable housing at 40%, market housing at a time when Wiltshire Council are not able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, short-term economic benefits, provision of public open space, enhancements of public rights of way, ecology and play areas, and all of these benefits would outweigh the principal harm raised, and the tilted balance weighs in favour of supporting the application. There is a slight change, I should have said at the beginning, I didn't realise the slide wasn't there, to condition 4. So condition 4 talks about the approved plans and documents. There is to be a note added to that condition whereby the landscape strategy and the constraints plan is purely for ecology reasons and not for landscape reasons. And that is due to the original plan as submitted demonstrated a meet-up sort of green area in the centre of the site, which was removed from the revised plan. And the landscape officer and the urban design officer have requested that that area is to be brought back in the reserve matters application. So subject to the change in that informative, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the section 106 contributions on page 72 of your agenda and the conditions that start on page 77. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. Questions from the committee members, please. Adrian, Councillor Foster.
Thank you. You mentioned very kindly that the, so I'm looking at the landscape strategy one, but it's not on there. They put a footpath inside on the other side of the hedge to the road, which is obviously much safer. And that you've mentioned it joins the existing access. Now, it might be my age, but when I recall the application on the other side of the road, one of the main reasons we were against that was the fact that there wasn't suitable footpaths from that area into the centre of the town. I can see from the pictures that 227 has a footpath in front of it, but is that a continuous footpath into the village? Is there access that way? Because obviously, if you can't get all the way in, you're not going to do part of it.
I believe there is a footpath. There are concerns with the state of the footpaths, and there are concerns with cars being parked on the footpaths. In the meeting that I've had with the parish council that was also attended by Highways, Highways have suggested to the parish council that they speak to them with regards to ticketing the cars that are parking on the pavements because they are causing an obstruction. And as already stated in my presentation, the state of the existing footpaths haven't been caused by this development, and therefore we're not able to ask for Section 106 contributions to improve those public rights of way that exist at the moment. But the parish council have been recommended to also speak to the highways team about other ways of improving those public footpaths in Holt.
Presumably sill payments could be used for that. And will there be a sill contribution significant enough from this?
Yes, there will be a sill contribution, yeah.
But because their local plan is not up to date, presumably they only get 15% of the sill and not the 25%.
I'm not sure on that one.
Chair, it'd be 25%. I mean, the neighbourhood plan is not considered up to date in terms of housing delivery, but it's an adopted and made plan, so they would still benefit from 25% of sill. Can I just add another thing, Chair, on the point of the site, the appeal site, in terms of what the inspector concluded? Not only did he make mention to the fact that the public transport options were considered to be fairly good for Holt, he also cycled, I'm just reading the actual appeal decision, he actually cycled from Melksham to Holt before making his judgment on that appeal. So you obviously went an extra step in terms of doing the non-motorised means of travelling about. And he also mentioned in that appeal decision that he considered walking from the appeal site into the village's amenities, church, the primary school, was considered to be fine. There was no concerns raised. And that would equally apply to this site being on the opposite side of the highway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Britton, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Sticking, please, with the issue of footpaths, I'm now a bit confused following what you said. Looking at paragraph, page 71, the paragraph immediately below the bullet points, the text there seems to suggest that you're arguing, since the state of the footpaths, existing footpaths is a pre-existing condition, long-standing, and I think you were saying that it wouldn't be reasonable to expect the 106 to cover those existing footpaths. If that's correct, there is a double negative at the end of that paragraph that has quite the contrary effect. It actually implies that the developer will be required to make a contribution to those existing footpaths.
So we have two issues. We have the footpaths and we have public rights of way. So the footpaths are existing problems that we can't solve. The NPPF does allow the local planning authority to seek 106 contributions to improve public rights of way network.
Your paragraph actually suggests that the developer will be required to make a contribution to those existing footpaths. Because of the double negative, it would not be unreasonable.
The final sentence in that paragraph says burdening the developer to remedy long-standing maintenance issues relating to the pavement would not be unreasonable.
Yeah, the word not should be removed, Chair.
Sorry?
The word not should be removed.
Right. That's what Councillor Britton's referring to. Hence his confusion.
My page 71 is different to your 71, that's fine.
No, that's the one there. Would not be unreasonable. So that not needs to be deleted then. Okay. Yeah. Buff, Councillor Thruffle.
Sorry, has that been accepted?
Yes, it's had to be deleted.
Negative vibes from...
No, Kenny's point that it had to be deleted has now been deleted. We do need to delete that. But hence your confusion. Yeah. You were correct to raise that. Yeah. A typo. Yeah.
A couple of tiny questions and one slightly more significant one. Holt is a large village, I presume, and you were saying that the pictures, the drawings of what it would look like were sort of not part of the permission. So the fact that the houses look extremely high for two-storey houses is not to be a concern at this stage. It's not setting a precedent.
That's correct, yeah, that'd be a
That's right.
reserve matters application.
And the final question was really how soon, since this is only an outline permission, how soon would it be able to be developed?
Well, there is a 3-year time limit, but I believe the applicant sent everybody a statement before the committee, and in there it says Redcliffe hope to be on site by early next year and finish the site within 2 years. So the committee would be able to reduce that 3-year condition to 2 years if they so wished. So condition 1 be begun either before the expiration of 3 years from the date permission. Or is it the reserve matters? Yeah. So condition 2, you ask for reserve matters to be submitted within 2 years rather than 3 years. You could do that as a committee.
Chair, may I just add another point? I mean, this is a relevant matter and it is something that we do engage with developers on a regular basis, especially when they're arguing that their site will benefit us in terms of housing delivery. So we expect a developer to then reciprocate and then say, okay, if that's the case, then we will commit to bringing the site forward and not land bank, as Councillor Greenman mentioned earlier. But we do need that enshrined in the decision. We can't just take it on their basis that that's what they'll do. So whilst you've got this supporting letter, as Gemma says, I think it would be desirable and necessary if committee were minded to take this forward into a resolution to approve, that condition could be tweaked to say within 2 years rather than the 3 years that they submit the reserve matters. Whether they can get on site and build it out within 2 years. They are saying that, but I think we need it in the condition.
Yeah, absolutely. Go along with that one. Councillor Foster, Adrian.
Thank you, Howard. If we can turn to page 73, under the affordable housing, I have a small concern here that it constantly mentions affordable housing throughout, 60%, which is 22 units in total, 13 units of being affordable rent, and then it's got the mix of affordable rents. My understanding was that the government and our own housing department are moving towards social rents and not affordable, and the government would prefer to see social in here, not affordable. Could you explain why we're still using the old terminology? Because there is a significant difference in the rent that they have to pay, and there's a significant difference in who can manage those properties. And I definitely couldn't approve this application as long as that remains affordable and not social.
I mean, I've been in dialogue with the housing officer, and I've checked the requirements from the affordable housing officer, and those are up to date as far as I am aware, unless Kenny is aware of any other updates.
My understanding is that conflicts with the present government's initiatives.
It may be that this wording complies with our policy, and the policy needs to be updated, but that hasn't happened yet.
The only other thing I would say, I mean, I don't disagree with what Gemma said. I mean, obviously this application in the report is supported by what our own housing officer team has advised. If members are minded to support the principle of the application, obviously there's a Section 106 process to be followed on from today, and that is clearly something that we could open up a discussion with our affordable housing team, new housing team, to see whether there is necessary tweaks. I mean, I'm not sure when this comment came in from the housing team, but I'm assuming it was fairly recently. But it is something that could then open up a follow-on discussion with the affordable team prior to any decision being made, because obviously, despite this report being brought to this committee today, no decision would be made after today. It would have to go through the Section 106 process and that discussion.
I understand what you're saying, Kenny, but I think we need to pin this down because I've had discussions, and I've had discussions because of the things I brought up at this meeting before, that the housing officers, what they're asking the developers to put in isn't reflecting what the council's need for housing is. And I've challenged them on several times with that and had discussions with them. And in the last discussion I had, which was back in January, they made it quite clear to me that social housing was going to be the priority from now on as guidance from the government. And this is not fitting in with that guidance, and it's not meeting the needs that this council has. And we need social housing, not affordable housing. And therefore, this doesn't meet this council's requirements, and I will always continue to challenge that.
The only thing I would say, I mean, Gemma did touch upon this. We do have an adopted plan. It does require 40%. The developers are committing to that 40%. The breakdown, which will be set out in the Section 106, is always open for follow-on discussion. Whether there's a material change that would have to then bring this report back to committee, that's always on the cards, because the Constitution does allow for that, that if this committee makes a decision and then a Section 106 revision triggers material change, the report would have to come back to this committee for a resolution again. If it's just tweaking the terminology, then that's not a material change.
Kenny, social housing and affordable housing difference is not a tweak. It's a social difference. And this doesn't meet our requirements as a council, and it doesn't meet the people's of Wiltshire's requirements. So unless it's changed to social, I am not voting for this policy.
The problem is, Kenny, and I think I see where Adrian's coming from. Affordable, and it may be terminology, but affordable is a very wide, broad brush approach to any kind of affordable housing. It's shared equity, rented, social, all sorts. What Adrian's trying to do is pin it down to a specific type of affordable housing. So he wants to focus.
The only thing I'd like to add, and I know I have had a discussion recently with the affordable housing team about first homes, and I know applications that are now being submitted now the affordable housing team are not asking for first homes anymore due to the changes in the NPPF. So the only other scenario is that this application was submitted last year and that therefore the affordable housing team have gone from the date of submission, which is what they're doing for first homes.
Right, we may have to revisit this.
That's not the element I'm concerned about. The affordable housing and the purchase is one thing. It's the affordable rent. It should be a social rent, not affordable rent. That's not acceptable.
I just want to draw a line into that. I think, Councillor Britton, you had something to come back to on this. You're not going to. Sorry, Sarah, thank you.
Hi, Chair. Thank you. It is open to the committee to amend the recommendation so that it works along the lines of the prior to, so that we include negotiation of the obligations in accordance with the report. So that would widen what we can look at in terms of the affordable housing, and it could include that we include the forms of affordable housing in line with the council's needs. I think that that's a potential way forward so that the committee is more content that it is going to meet the council's needs.
Thank you, Sarah. Kenny?
That's a good point. That, as I was mentioning, Section 106s can take quite a considerable time frame and things can change. And for major schemes, I mean, I'm mentioning Warminster Urban Extension, that took 3 years to get the legal agreement from start to finish. And during that time frame, changes were made at the NPPF and our own requirements, local needs changed. So the point that Sarah's making is very valid, that we would not only open up a discussion, we'd obviously see what the needs are at the time of the Section 106 being drafted. I don't know when these comments came in from the housing team, but when it comes to a Section 106, that Section 106 is predicated on current need. So the point you're making, Councillor, about any scheme now meeting needs is absolutely valid, and Section 106s are looked at that time in terms of what is the current need, not what it was when the consultation was written, which might have been last year. So that would be a material matter for the committee to consider today, that it's not in stone that that is what will be in a Section 106, because we do need to reflect upon whatever the current needs are for meeting the social requirements.
Sorry, I just don't understand why we can't amend this to sociable rent for the 13 houses now. Why can't we do that now? Because if we don't do it now, I know what happens. Negotiations happen, they argue different things, and we end up with exactly what we don't want. But if we put it in writing that it's social rent, affordable house is fine, but we need to have social rent.
My answer to that, Chair, is as the committee, you're the decision maker. If you consider that is material to this decision, then you can instruct that that is a change as part of your endorsed position, that you would see the heads of terms in Section 106 being edited to that format. And obviously, as I mentioned, any negotiation with a developer at the Section 106 stage must include an up-to-date position on need. Otherwise, it wouldn't meet the legal tests.
No, that's fine, because a lot could happen in 2 years. Yes, I'm happy with it.
I'm also offering, if you want me to go back to the affordable housing team for future committees to get an understanding of where that change has happened and how they're processing it from their end. That would help.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. Thank you for that. I suspect we may be revisiting that in due course. Any more questions from our members, please? Oh, I've just got the one, and it's probably quite a superficial one, really. I'm just thinking of a aesthetic value. Just looking at the illustrative, and I recognise, of course, this is an illustrative master plan for the site here. It shows the properties at the front there. I'm talking about bottom left, which is probably the southwest corner, the properties there. The front elevation being behind the rear elevation of number 227. Now, in terms of aesthetic amenity, you have already shown hedging and so on like that, along there. I would quite like that to continue, rather than the temptation being to bring those houses forwards. So it's not overbearing either to as a site in itself, or overbearing to the neighbouring properties. Is it possible to put that informative in there if this application gets that far?
I'll cover that, Chair. So yes, undoubtedly, that is something that this committee could take into account and consider amending the condition that refers to the follow-up reserve matters. You would need to add a very clear reference that although this is not a detailed plan you'd be considering, there are elements within it that you may wish to see any reserve matters application follow through on, and that includes the setback distance of those properties
Yes, thank you.
behind. So that is clearly something you could add as a committee.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any more questions from the committee members? No. In which case then, if I may, I'd like to go to Lisa Wicks, please.
Good morning. As a mother and Holt resident for 10 years, I know what it's really like to live in Holt. Redcliffe Homes call this proposal sustainable, but that word means very little when you look at the reality, and I will share 3 with you today. Firstly, safety. This site sits on a far stretch of the B3107 where cars, vans and lorries regularly enter and leave Holt at 50 miles an hour or more. There is no safe crossing at this location. A dropped curb is not a safe crossing. If this development goes ahead, children, little ones, will have to cross that road to get to the preschool, to primary school, or to catch the secondary school buses every day on foot. There is no provision to make that safe. It only takes one child being hit on that road for it to be one too many. Secondly, I have concerns about the documents submitted by Redcliffe claiming the site is sustainable. Their own energy and sustainability statement, section 8 refers to the site being in a city and section 9 mentions existing buildings. Factually incorrect, with a holding objection in place from Wiltshire's own climate officer. Redcliffe calls this a walkable site. However, their design and access statement and travel plan are also factually incorrect. They're listing amenities that don't exist in Holt and timings that are not doable from the site. 10.75 minutes to the shop, no. And that's not without taking the state of the footpath into account. Councillors, don't be swayed by developer spin. Let's be clear, this is not a sustainable site. As the Appeal Inspector for Bewley Homes stated, I acknowledge the limitations of the services available in Holt. There would therefore be a reliance on private motorised vehicles. Third point I would like to make is about the wider sustainability, as I began to think about all the times I have to drive out of Holt. It has no health facilities, no secondary school, no pharmacy, no supermarket. I could go on. Buses. No buses in the evenings, none on Sundays. You couldn't get to a hospital appointment at the RUH. You can't get a bus to a train to get to London early in the morning. And you certainly can't get home after a late shift in Trowbridge or Bradford-on-Avon. In winter months, when rural flooding affects nearby towns, Holt gets no bus service at all. People drive because they have to. This site would be a car-led estate from day one. So this is the reality of living in Holt. This site is not sustainable on this side of the B3107. The planning officer said in her report this application breaches core policies 1, 2 and 7, the Holt Neighbourhood Plan and Wiltshire's climate strategy. From my understanding, with this tilted balance, if the harm outweighs the benefit, you can refuse this application. As councillors voted in to make decisions by residents of Holt, please refuse this application.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Kate Leroy, please.
Good morning, councillors. I also live in Holt and I'm here to object to this development. This housing estate will permanently degrade a very valued Wiltshire landscape. The land here rises up from Holt, offering long, uninterrupted views across open farmland. The nearby footpath is well used by locals and visitors alike. The National Trust promotes the walk along this footpath, which links the historic properties at Great Chalfield Manor and the courts. The walk here is so special that it features in regional guidebooks. Wiltshire Council's landscape officer described this as one of the better examples of rural farmland in the character area, with high susceptibility to change. He said the characteristic field pattern seen here was centuries old. The landscape officer initially concluded the development would result in such major adverse landscape harm that this development should be refused, despite the housing shortfall. I find it hard to understand why he has now withdrawn that strongly expressed objection. He still accepts that this is a valued landscape that will be significantly damaged. I disagree with his new conclusion that the harm is sufficiently justified or adequately mitigated. The revised plans push the housing further towards the footpath. The housing visible here will not relate to Holt's existing historic boundaries, but now project artificially east along Melksham Road. The estate will intrude into the landscape with generic rooftops, fencing, parked cars and streetlights, visible 150 metres from a National Trust promoted walk between two of its historic Wiltshire properties. Another concern is the new gateway into Holt. Mature hedgerow will be removed for a visibility splay and replaced with a junction and a bus shelter, damaging the rural character of the village. The landscape officer also commented on the earlier appeal decision for the opposite side of the road. That was judged harmful to the intrinsic beauty of the countryside, even though it was less visible and better screened. He concluded this Redcliffe site is significantly more damaging in landscape terms. It is more prominent in a more sensitive landscape with less mitigation. Councillors, you are entitled to take a different view from your planning officer. The damage being done here is a step too far. This is your chance to uphold Wiltshire's policies that protect valued landscapes. You don't have to accept the wrong development in the wrong place. What's also missing is a proper assessment of the cumulative impacts from these adjacent, entirely unplanned developments on ecology, drainage, flood risk and infrastructure. Holt is a village. We're often entirely cut off by flooding. Our narrow roads and pavements cannot absorb growth at this scale. To pick up on the earlier point made, ticketing cars parking on the pavement through the village just won't work. People are living in old cottages from 200 years old. They have no parking provision. They have nowhere else to go. The village just can't cope with the new traffic and the new parking that's taking place here. It's damaging and unsustainable. Please refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Kate. That's an impassioned plea. Richard Goodman, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. I also have lived in Holt for many years. I'm concerned about this application, not just because it's another housing estate on the edge of the village, but because of what it means for road safety and the lack of joined-up thinking that surrounds it. Melksham Road already carries over 10,000 vehicles a day. This includes some of the largest HGVs. It's noisy, it's fast, and for pedestrians and cyclists, it's genuinely intimidating. If approved, this development will create a long, straight, unlit road with housing set back behind hedgerows, encouraging speeding in and out of the village. Highways say they cannot be effective speed-reducing measures because this is a Class 2 route. But why are there speed cushions on other Class 2 routes in Wiltshire? There are 3 that I can think of in Bradford on Avon alone, so why not here? What this site really needs is a proper entrance feature, not just a ghost junction. Ideally a roundabout, but something that slows traffic and signals that you're entering a village. The developer originally offered to install a light-controlled crossing. Why? Because Highways initially said this was a dangerous road and that it would be needed. But then they were told to take it out. The reason? Not enough people would use it. I find this quite astonishing. As has been said, children walking to primary school will need to cross this road twice a day. Older students will be crossing it to catch a bus, and in winter they'll be doing this in the dark. With no controlled crossing, no cycle infrastructure, no traffic calming, no joined-up plan for sustainable travel, and vehicles regularly exceeding the speed limit, the scheme as drafted is fraught with potential danger. Turning in more detail to speed limits, the current speed limit along the Melksham Road here is 50 miles an hour, with the proposed reduction to 30 miles an hour to be applied for only when the first house is occupied. This approach will necessitate ripping out a 250-metre length of mature hedgerows to create visibility splays. But if the 30-mile-an-hour limit were to come in before work starts, this could be reduced to only 25 metres. It's safer, cheaper, and better for our landscape. Why isn't this being done? Please consider this making a condition. As has been said again, the walking route into the village is very poor, uneven, narrow, and often obstructed. Residents will be expected to use this daily, but there's no commitment to fix it. The parish council has asked, but it doesn't seem that this can be part of the deal. This application fails Wiltshire's own policies, the NPPF, the local transport plan, and more importantly, it fails the people who live in Holt. Please don't sign off on something so short-sighted. If you are minded to approve, please insist on proper highways planning first and something that genuinely makes the village entrance safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. To the applicant now, please, David Hagan.
Hello, councillors. My name is David Hagan and I'm the planning manager at Redcliffe Homes. As an SME company, Redcliffe Homes, like many other SMEs, promote high quality, highly sustainable homes, which we care passionately about. Redcliffe Homes is not a large national PLC where targets and bottom lines are a key consideration. However, we do require a pipeline of future sites to continue to provide for the well-established housing need in Wiltshire, both existing homeowners relocating or downsizing, or first-time buyers. Many of our houses are bought by either downsizers or first-time buyers, so both are critical to Wiltshire and this housing market area. We have a very good relationship with Wiltshire Council's own affordable housing arm, and to date have worked with the housing team to deliver 80 affordable houses together. The proposal before you is one which we have been working on for well over a year and is now supported by all statutory consultees of Wiltshire Council, together with your own highly qualified planning officers. The proposed scheme is relatively modest in size, however, it still proposes 22 affordable houses, a small community orchard, significant public open space, 33% BNG, an on-site play area, highly energy efficient housing, timber frames, air source heat pumps, electric vehicle charging points to each property, a new bus stop and shelter, the crossing point, highway improvements to relocate the 30 miles per hour further to the east, financial contributions and SIL payments totalling approximately £850,000. These will go to local schemes, including a significant SIL payment of over £500,000, of which a quarter will go to the local parish council. Whilst I share your frustrations that this is not strictly plan-led, unfortunately a plan-led system alone cannot be relied upon. There are always numerous exceptions and sites which do not come forward as planned, and small developable and sustainable sites such as this are required to plug the gaps. Planning law and national planning policy is clear that where there is a housing shortage, such as there currently is in Wiltshire with a severe shortage, then sustainable sites such as this should be supported without delay. The site is highly developable, and should planning permission be granted, Redcliffe hope to be on site by early next year and finish the site within 2 years. This will greatly help in achieving a deliverable housing supply to defend against larger, more controversial housing developments. As I've mentioned previously, all statutory consultees support this scheme together with the planning officers. National planning policy is clear that applications can not only be refused where harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits. As your planning officer will highlight using appeals as evidence, this is an extremely high bar to meet with regards to harm, particularly as there are no objections from any statutory consultees. Furthermore, the adjacent appeal decision was very clear and set a strong precedent that development in this location with a severe housing supply was sustainable and acceptable in planning terms. As mentioned previously, I feel your frustrations that it may feel like you are being attacked from all directions with housing. However, I would encourage you to assess each site on its own planning merits and to ensure you allow the best and highest quality schemes through, such as this, to ultimately reach a housing supply and ultimately a defensible position from future large-scale speculative housing. The reality is, with an increasing population, that sometimes you have to make unpopular decisions, but I would encourage you to make the correct planning and legal decision to avoid any further delays and associated costs to both sides. This will enable Redcliffe Homes to provide a high-quality choice for the next generation of homeowners so that children and grandchildren can live near to where they grow up, rather than moving to cities such as London or Bristol. I would ask you to follow the recommendations of all the statutory experts and planning officer and make the correct planning decision and support this relatively small-scale application, which will greatly help with a deliverable housing supply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your email too. Tom O'Connor, please.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this application. I'm Tom O'Connor. I'm the Managing Director of Redcliffe Homes. Just by way of background, Redcliffe is an independent family house builder. We don't like the term developer because we actually get directly engaged in our work. We've been building homes now for over 40 years, and 30 of those years we've been building in Wiltshire. In fact, it's our home ground. I think we've built over 800 homes in Wiltshire, and we're currently building out schemes in Chippenham and Devizes amounting to 240 homes, the affordable housing contracts for which are with your council, who we do have a very good working relationship with, and I'll pick up on that point later. We employ hundreds of contractors and tradespeople, most of whom live and work in Wiltshire, and we've worked with them for many, many years, and we have a very close family relationship with many of them. They always come back and work for us. They like working for us. I think I can say that. We'll take a genuine pride in the quality of the work that we produce. I think if you go on our website, you'll see that, and you'll see the design awards that we won over the years through a lot of hard work and effort by everybody in the office. We believe that this site could produce a very good quality scheme. It's effectively standalone. It's on the edge of an extremely attractive village of Holt. It has everything that we would like to enhance, to perhaps increase the vibrancy of the village by providing bungalows for those who become infirm and who want to downsize, first-time houses so that children can remain in the village, and of course the 22, and I heard the point, affordable homes, which again I'll come to a little bit later. So I think we can make a contribution. Another point I'd like to stress is that we do believe in sustainable house building. We build using timber frame modern methods of construction. We install air source heat pumps. We're not obliged to. We could put in gas boilers and save ourselves £5,000 or £6,000 for each house. We don't. We're committed to ensuring that our houses are sustainable in the long term. And we are finding at our site in Chippenham, for example, that people do genuinely appreciate it. And we're finding that is going down very well with people. It's always difficult, isn't it, with, when you're trying to build in a local community. We understand those concerns, and we have tried to work with people throughout the process. But understandably, they have concerns, and I'd be the same, frankly. But I do think, as a company, we do try and work with local communities. It's important that we do, because at the end of the day, we want to produce something that's of good quality for everybody. It's not just literally about the profit margin. It's not about that for us. It's about quality and good design. We have to make a profit, because otherwise the banks wouldn't support us. But our motivation is quality and design. Picking up 2 points, very fair points made earlier. Do we land bank? Absolutely not. Can't afford to land bank, nor would we wish to. We're keen to move on this scheme as quickly as we possibly can, subject to getting the Reserved Matters application, or subject to getting consent in the first place, of course, but then getting Reserved Matters consent through the system, which is taking time, and we all know that. But we will do what we can, and we're keen to progress it as fast as we can. The other point, validly made, frankly, is the point on affordable housing. It is confusing for everybody. And I have absolutely no problem at all in agreeing here now and having admitted that 13 of those homes would be social rent. In all likelihood, we'll be working with your housing department anyway, so I don't see that would be a big issue for us. So I'm happy to record that. I think that's really, I don't have any more to say unless anybody's got any questions for me to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Steve Siddle, please, from the Parish Council. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, you've now heard a clear and consistent message from Holt. This is a speculative application outside the settlement boundary on a valued rural landscape with significant and unaddressed impacts on ecology, highways and amenity. Should this go ahead, we will have a brutal new solid edge to the village rather than the feathered edge that the planning inspector weighed in his balance when approving the adjacent development. The Redcliffe Homes transport statement and travel plan were factually inaccurate. These documents overstate accessibility and present a picture of sustainable transport that doesn't exist. And crucially, they ignore the cumulative impacts of 145 homes directly opposite each other, feeding into the same overstretched infrastructure. There are no new employment opportunities in Holt. All the residents that can afford a car will have to outcommute. The carless will remain unemployed. Is that sustainable? The highways officer in this case has steadfastly refused to engage with us and hear our local knowledge. In February, this committee refused an application at Malmesbury where a town councillor highlighted factually incorrect transport statements and highways issues. Furthermore, out of the 75 Holt residents who have objected to this application, 96% mention highways impact as a concern. That is not NIMBYism. That's informed local knowledge and community insight, which is the kind the MPPF says should carry weight. And we ask this committee to hold highways officers to account, to revisit the entrance to our village with traffic calming measures and controlled crossing if this application is remotely considered for approval today. What we are seeing is death by 1,000 cuts, slow, cumulative, irreversible harm to our landscape, our infrastructure, and the character of our village. This development pushes Holt beyond what is reasonable, sustainable, or plan-led on top of the 90-home unplanned site. In the emerging local plan, Holt is allocated 0 residual housing to 2038. This is because we made a neighbourhood plan and we have over-delivered on our allocation. We now have a 90-house unplanned development permitted and this unplanned application for 55 more. Unplanned development is contrary to the basic tenet of the MPPF, and if allowed to continue, will wreck rural Wiltshire, placing people where there are no jobs, no infrastructure, with poor unplanned highways issues. Councillor Clark raised this at your February meeting. I quote, "I am sick and tired of feeling we have to approve just because of land supply. This is our plan, and this is what we build to." If you approve this against your and our plans based on the lack of land supply, you will have spoilt a Wiltshire village to cut a negligible 1.5% of the housing shortfall. If you are going to approve this application and all others like it on the basis of land supply, then you call into question your need to exist. We have done what was asked of us, and we urge you to uphold your policies to protect your credibility and to look to where housing is actually needed, not here, where it clearly isn't. This is not plan-led, it damages a valuable landscape, it's not safe, and it is not sustainable. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I echo many of those sentiments. Appreciate that. Thank you. To our local member then, please. Councillor Trevor Carving.
Thanks, Chair. I would invite the committee to refuse this application for the reasons you've heard about here in the open forum, basically CP1 and 7. Also, I'd like to consider a CP51, which is the landscape policy as well. Should the committee not wish to refuse today, you may also wish to consider deferring the application. I would like you to consider perhaps a site visit. I know it would be a new committee, but I would love to get you out there to have a look at this site and to actually inspect the problems that you've heard about here. Another reason for deferral might be to resolve the highways problems that we've heard about and which I'll say a bit more about in a moment. And we've also heard the point about from Councillor Foster about the affordable housing. That would also be maybe sorted out. So there's another option. If you nevertheless decide that you wish to permit, again, we've heard about various conditions that need to be strengthened or altered. And again, we need to reconsider, I think, the highways problem. So if you do wish to commit, there's a few details, which again, I'll go through in a moment. Just picking up on a few things from the report next. So if you go to page 42, I say I'll referring to the landscape points, you have that nice picture at the bottom. It does say the site sits on a slope with the northern end being highest. In fact, the northern end is lowest. It slopes away from the road down towards the brook, which you can see at the bottom of that, the top of the photograph, the bottom of the landscape. Also, over the page where it talks about Chalfield Manor, which is just off the picture here to the north, and it talks about Grade 2 registered parking gardens. I'm not sure about the parking gardens, but Great Chalfield is Grade 1 listed, Chairman, as you'd expect. Then there's a lot of talk about the approved application to the south of the road for 90 houses. I don't think we should accept really that because one site has been approved, that another one automatically should be. Villages naturally develop incrementally. That's happened in Holt over the 19th and 20th centuries. Rapid development can be very disruptive of this sort of scale. And also, if we extrapolate that argument, okay, because we've given one field, we have to give the other field. Well, if you keep going with that, why not the next field along and the next one after that? And you end up with this sort of tentacle stretching out towards Melksham. So the argument that because one site has been permitted, therefore the next one should be, I think is not a good argument, Chairman. It's not good planning. Then I mentioned on page 46, it says all the units should be no greater than 2 stories. Again, if you're going to permit today, I'd like to see that included in the conditions, perhaps within condition 4, just to make sure about that. Then the point about the land supply, as we've heard in detail from Kenny about where we are with that, and the basic point is that whereas in recent years we've argued about are we one side of the line, are we one side, the other side, should this site be included, should this site be discounted, and there were some very detailed appeal decisions where they were looking at individual sites and whether to count them in or out. We've got no hope, we've got no chance whatsoever of meeting our land supply requirements for the foreseeable future unless there's a drastic change in government policy. So there's no point in thinking, oh yeah, if we permit this one, perhaps we'll get within our required level. We won't. And I think, in a sense, because we are so far away from any hope whatsoever of getting towards our land supply, it does give us the freedom to look at these terms in planning terms rather than just numerical terms. And it does give us the freedom to refuse in unsustainable applications like this one. So we can respect our plan, we can defend our plan. Page 55, again, says at the top that, again, that appeal decision priority should be given to the more sustainable locations. Yes, it should. This is not one of them. Going back to the landscaping point, so I'm on page 59 now. The council's landscape officer has viewed the site from the public right-of-way at various locations. Of the 8 viewpoints, the site was only visible from 3. Well, that's the kind of subjective thing, isn't it? You can walk along a footpath and you can say, oh yeah, I can see it now, now I can't see it. 3 should be enough, really. It's visible from the footpath. That's really all that matters on that one. And yes, so we've heard about the conditions around the village green and the urban design. And as I say, we do need to tie down, I think, the various points that have been raised on this. Otherwise, we're up to this kind of outline reserve matters paradox, where if we don't raise it at the outline stage, we're told when it comes to reserve matters, oh, you're too late, you should have raised it. Or if we try and raise it at, we're always told that we should get these things nailed down as much as possible at this stage where we possibly can. Going back then to the highways points, which are clearly quite a serious bone of contention, the community would like a proper gateway coming into the village. You've heard that this is a busy road. We're told that we can't have a roundabout because of the fact that most of the traffic will be on the main road. But we also look at roundabouts not just as a way of distributing traffic, we use them as traffic calming. And I'm sure you can all think of places where roundabouts do just that. We have one at the other end of Holt, down by the toll gate. The main road is going through here, much less traffic on the side road. I can think of others around my patch. In Atworth, there's a roundabout which feeds about 10 houses and a small industrial estate coming onto a main road. Very slight traffic, but it's done as a traffic calming. We have a similar thing in Staverton. There's a roundabout not far from here which doesn't have any side roads on it. It's just a roundabout on a straight road. It's there purely as traffic calming. So we do use them in this way. Why not in this case? I would see it as a possibility. There was a point made on the, where is it, page 70, that should we cannot impose that access on the approved Gladman site to the south because they already have an access. Well, that's true. We couldn't force them to do that because they already have their planning permission. But there's no harm in talking to them about it. They may well decide that it's in their interest to get a more sensible access into their development. It might make the properties more saleable. We also have this point about the crossing and the circular argument that if there's no crossing, people will have to drive, therefore they won't use the crossing. If there were to be a crossing, then obviously more people would use it. If you imagine yourself living on this estate, the primary school, the preschool are on the other side of the road. You've got to get your kids to school in the morning. Do you walk or do you take the car? The presence or otherwise of a crossing will make a significant impact to that decision. If there isn't a crossing, people don't cross. If there is a crossing, people do cross. So again, I think that ought to be looked at, Chairman. There's the Section 106 requirement for a cycle track, 61,000 towards the delivery of an off-road cycle route to serve the site, the village, and Melksham and Bradford-on-Avon. Now, you could add in 100,000 for the same purpose which came from the other site. If you want to get a cycle route between Melksham and Bradford-on-Avon, you can't use the existing road, it's too narrow. You need an off-road, as it says in the thing, you need an off-road cycle track. It's 6 miles. You're buying the land, you're constructing a brand new surfaced site. You're not going to get that for 61 or 161,000 pounds. That's impossible, Chairman, in real terms. It's not going to happen. I would love it if it did. I mean, I live in Melksham, I work in Bradford. I'd love to be able to shoot between the two on my bike. I have cycled along the road, and I was very impressed that the planning inspector did so as well. It's generally seen as a sign of lunacy, cycling along that road, Chairman. That's the response I get when I tell people I've done it. It's not something normal people do, put it that way. It's not something that people in this development are going to do. They're not going to get on their bike and toddle into Melksham along that road or Bradford-on-Avon. And we're not going to get the off-road route. Now, if we're not going to get an off-road route, why are we asking for one? Why are we asking for money towards something which is never going to happen? We're told that we can have that. It's not unreasonable to ask for something which is way out in both senses of the word. It's not unreasonable to ask for improvements on the rights of way, which goes shooting off in all directions across the county. But it is unreasonable to ask for improvements on the pavements. The pavements are something which people might use to get into town. That might again help people make decisions as to how they're going to get around. So it seems crazy, Chairman, that we're told we can't improve the pavements because it doesn't relate directly to the development. We neither do the rights of way, neither does the cycle track. So why not the pavements? So again, I think that's something that we could be looking at in more detail. The bus. I get around quite a bit on the bus. I've never used a bus to get to Holt. It's very difficult. People do. You see the zigzag bus zigzagging around. You see people on it. So it's obviously does get a certain amount of use. But it's compared with the Atworth route to the north, the Hilton route to the south, which have both got half-hourly services, and including weekends and Sundays, Holt is very badly, I don't care what the inspector said, Holt is not well served by bus services. Right, so to wrap up, Chairman, again, I would like you to refuse if you possibly could. It would be nice. CP1, CP2, CP51, the neighbourhood plan, MPPF, paragraph 15, 176B relates to the rural landscape. If you wish to defer for a site visit and to get the highways looked at again, putting the boot into highways and getting them to take a more positive approach, then that would be good as well. If you wish to permit Could we have the 30 mile an hour before the start of process for the reason you heard about in the open forum? 2-storey fixed so they don't creep up to 2.5-storey, and the village green in accordance with the planning statement. This gateway question, not an informative but a condition, please, so that it's something which has to be enforced. Construction management plan, can that be beefed up so that the traffic comes in from the east and not through the village, and that there's no parking on, that any parking during construction has to be on site, and again, not on the B3107 or the local estates. I think that's just about concludes what I have to say, Chairman. Over to you. Good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stella. There's a lot of detail that you've given us. I'm going to ask, Gemma, I've seen you writing frantically. Do you want to come back on any of those? There's quite a lot to come back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the energy and sustainability document was raised. The council officers have requested more information to come forward as part of the reserved matters application, which is condition 6. With regards to landscape, obviously the landscape officer has walked along the public rights of way, highlighted by the parish council. And I think it's important to note that the previous inspector did raise harm to the open countryside for the appeal to the south, but it was when doing the tilted balance, the benefits outweighed that harm, which obviously is a similar situation to where we are here. Highway safety, obviously the village gateway we've heard a lot about, that is to be relocated, it's on the plans. It's also a section 106 requirement. The Toucan crossing, again, is understood, yes, it was there originally. The highways team had a discussion with the traffic management team, and as my report states, a Toucan crossing requires 50 pedestrian crossings an hour. And it is considered that this would not occur as a result of this site, and therefore the Toucan crossing has been removed. Discussion about the emerging local plan and the numbers for Holt within that emerging local plan. Obviously, as you've heard from Kenny earlier, it holds very limited weight at this present moment in time, and the decisions have to be based on current policy, which is unfortunately at this present moment in time based around housing land supply and the tilted balance. I don't think at any point we are, as Wiltshire Council, saying that because we've lost the appeal to the south, that you therefore have to approve this site. Every application is based on its own merit. There are just similarities with the case. So the inspector previously confirmed harm to core policy 1, 2 and 7 by reason of the site being located outside the limits of development. He then raised harm in terms of landscape, which was core policy 51, but then did the tilted balance, and it was his tilted balance made the decision that the benefits outweighed that harm. There's a lot of discussion about sustainability. There's just a few areas in the previous appeal statement which I think may be helpful. He talks about the limitations of services available in Holt, which of course are also experienced by existing households. He recognises that lots of settlements in Wiltshire are in a similar position, but that does not necessarily mean they should be deemed to be locations that were unsustainable and so inappropriate for further housing. He considered the limitations in service provision were not so great to render Holt unsustainable for a scheme of this size when taken with the village's recently built developments. He continues to say, when interpreting government guidance, he considers it does not mean new houses should be limited to places where all needs of its residents can be met by a choice of transport modes other than by private motorised vehicles, as there would be few, if any, undeveloped sites with such a level of accessibility in the county. Rather, there is an acceptance of certain sites being developed, even though future occupiers would be reliant to some extent on the private car. This is acknowledged to some degree by the framework, the NPPF, recognising that opportunities to maximise sustainable transport solutions will vary between rural and urban areas. And finally, he accepted that the access to services and alternative transport modes were restricted to some degree, but he concluded that neither the limited facilities in Holt nor the distance to them from the site rendered the location insufficiently unsustainable to conflict with core policy 60 and 61. So that's just highlighting the point that you don't have to just rely on public transport in order to make a site sustainable. With the discussions that we've had with Highways and the Parish Council, we've had one meeting with the Parish Council, we've had lots of email correspondence. There is an existing population in Holt. There are existing children that live on the same side of the road as this development, and those people cross the road within the village at a later point. This isn't the only crossing available to the people living on this site to cross over and access the other facilities. I think that was it.
Thanks, Kenny.
Just a reminder, we do have Chris Manns from our Highways Authority present today, if it would be useful to members to hear from Chris.
I already waved to him and indicated that I'd like to come in, so thank you for that. So Chris, Toucan Crossing, it's almost like giving somebody a Christmas present and taking it away. I'd be interested to know what you have to say about that. 50 crossings per hour. I understand your rationale behind that, but just say 50 houses had 2 children each, and each of the 2 children were being walked to school by a parent. That's 150 crossings in 2 hours of the day alone. So there would be pinch points there. I think it's slightly miserly taking it away, but I'm going to ask you to come back on that. £61,100 towards the delivery and off-road cycle route. I don't know if you had any input into this. I take Trevor's point. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Could that be best used elsewhere? And I would like to come back to the pavement issue. So be interested to note, you would have been taking notes anyway from what has been said. I'd like you to come back on some of those if you would, please. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chair. On the pedestrian crossing issue, Gemma and yourself are right that the guidance is that a signalised crossing can only be provided when 50 pedestrian movements happen within the peak hour periods, and that's within all of the peak hour periods. It's generally not considered best practice to provide it in an area where those targets are not met. In this case, the development of 55 houses is highly unlikely to meet those figures. And the infrastructure required to provide such a crossing can also create an urbanising effect. And whilst that should not outweigh highway safety matters, it is the view of the Highway Authority that in this instance, it is not recommended to provide a signalised crossing in this area, and that the uncontrolled pedestrian crossing that has been proposed would be adequate to serve the needs of the development. As Gemma's highlighted as well, there's existing residents, children that live within the village that use the existing pedestrian infrastructure within the village. As far as we're aware, there's no clear and highway safety matters being raised as an existing issue, and we feel that the development as proposed would not meet the tests of NPPF to recommend for refusal on highway safety matters in that regard. Moving on to the point about the condition of the footpaths throughout the village, I think what the points being made is that contributions can be sought towards improvements to pedestrian facilities, but it cannot be sought towards maintenance issues. And I think the points that Gemma made earlier about the condition of the footpath is essentially a maintenance issue and not a safety issue in the sense that the provision isn't there. We've touched upon parking issues obstructing the pavement. Obviously, that is that's an obstruction in parking on a footway is a police matter, and can be enforced as necessary. I take the point from a local resident as well that there are limited off-street parking for some properties along there. On-street parking can have an impact on traffic calming as well and slowing speeds. So in the context of the development, they are existing issues which I think for the addition of 55 houses is not going to create an unacceptable highway safety impact in the context of NPPF in that regard. With regards to the crossing point proposed as an uncontrolled crossing point, the Highway Authority has recommended a condition that is attached to any consent that is granted to ensure visibility displays are provided at those crossing points to make sure that adequate visibility is available for pedestrians, but also vehicles to see those pedestrians. Those visibility displays we would expect to be based on existing 85th percentile speeds of vehicles travelling along Melksham Road. To assist with the safety of that, the speed limit is being moved to the eastern boundary of the site. This will include a new gateway to Holt, essentially. It's the recommendation for the gateway is a type B, as what we class as a type B gateway, which will include sort of thermoplastic paint rumble strips on the approach to the 30-mile-an-hour limit, and signage and coloured surfacing at the speed limit change, as well as 30-mile-an-hour limit roundels painted onto the road so that all vehicles are quite clear that they're entering a different area. I think the relocation of that speed limit will help with speeding along that stretch of road. Currently, it's obviously a 50-mile-an-hour limit, and the speed limit changes as you enter the village, essentially. So this will push that speed limit further away from the entry to the village, notwithstanding the new development. And it will give drivers more time to become aware that they're entering a new environment and that they need to adjust their speed accordingly. So I think that will definitely have a positive impact. I know that additional traffic calming has been requested, such as the form of a mini roundabout. I think Gemma touched on at the beginning that a mini roundabout only tends to work if you have balanced arms to that roundabout. 55 dwellings is not going to create anywhere near the level of traffic that that exists on Melksham Road currently as through traffic. And therefore it's the Highway Authority's view essentially that a mini roundabout would actually probably create additional conflict, because those travelling through the roundabout on Melksham Road would not be expecting to have to stop because of the limited amount of traffic coming from the development. There's also an issue with having sufficient land to the south of Melksham Road to provide such a mini roundabout, because you would need to have adequate deflection to ensure that vehicles did actually slow down and didn't just fly straight across the roundabout. And I do not believe that there is adequate land to the south to be able to provide that deflection necessary. That's quite a number of issues I've kind of whizzed over. I don't know if there's anything that I've missed there, Chair. Is there anything you want me to comment on further?
Kenny, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points from me on the highway position, just to focus the committee's attention to the actual proposal. It is an outline application for 55 dwellings with all matters reserved except access. So the one detailed plan that we've got is the T-controlled junction, the T-junction that's shown. Can you get the slide up, please, Gemma? So that's the only detailed plan that's submitted with this application, that that plan. So it's showing broadly the location of the existing field access that would become a engineered junction to serve the dwellings. That is an important matter because that is part of the application. What is not in front of the council or the committee today is a roundabout. And you've heard from Chris questioning whether a roundabout could even be accommodated within the highway provision. And there's obviously an issue there. But more so, the application that's in front of this committee is the one that has to be determined. And that is with that T junction, because that is the only detailed element of this application. The other point I would make about highways is just to remind members that the government, as they always do, they steer decision makers. And when it comes to highway matters, the government and their inspectors will go down this particular line and look at paragraph 116, which says, and I'll quote it out if I may, Chair, development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network following mitigation would be severe, taking into account all reasonable future scenarios. So where you've got an application and you've got the experts within our own highway authority concluding that this particular scheme wouldn't result in either unacceptable material impacts to highway safety or severe road network impacts, then I would suggest, Chair and fellow councillors, paragraph 116 would be a very difficult hurdle to come across at appeal. You would always be expected to be able to evidence any harm that paragraph requires decision makers to have due regard to if it was to be refused. And not that I like saying it, the council would be exposed to costs if that was to be a ground for refusal, because that is a key test. And we've been here before many times with inspectors, and it's written very clearly in terms of what they expect decision makers to be able to evidence if there is going to be a highway conflict. The other point I would like to make, Chair, is to go back to that appeal decision in terms of landscape. And I'm not for the minute suggesting that local residents don't value the landscape character on the eastern side of Holt and all around Holt for that matter, but the inspector pinpoints the landscape character. It's not a valued landscape in MPPF terms. It's not greenbelt, it's not special landscape, it's not national landscape. So it's valued locally for obvious reasons, but it's not a valued landscape in MPPF terms. And that is covered in paragraph 187 of the MPPF. So I'm not for a minute suggesting there wouldn't be harm. I think Gemma's report touches upon this accurately. There would be harm, there'd be conflict with the MPPF in terms of the loss of greenfield, but it is a balancing act decision that decision makers have to make in this scenario. And unfortunately, if we're ever to address the housing land supply, and I take the point Councillor Carbon makes about whenever we'll get to that stage, but we need to be showing to inspectors when we do appeal decisions that we are making the right decisions and refusing applications that we can fully defend at appeal. And my last point, Chair, is the fact, just to mention, that the government like testing councils and putting them on performance reviews. And there is a serious situation that councils enter when we get so many overturns. So the 10%, you might have heard 10% being mentioned by governments. That is the figure. The government says if councils breach the 10% rule in terms of overturns, there is the very risk of councils entering special measures. Special measures means this council cannot determine applications. And we're getting close to that 10%. We're 7 point something %. And that is a risk moving forward, that if we're potentially refusing applications and not having very robust grounds to defend, there is obviously not only the risk of losing that appeal, but obviously getting close to that 10% threshold. And the special measures is not something we want to enter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kenny, for that. Yeah, I was trying to tease out what mechanisms we had or what instruments we could use to try and mitigate highways' impact rather than using it as means of refusal. I just wanted to know what we could do to improve issues there with Chris. Hence my question about the Toucan crossing, because obviously if that's taken away, potentially you said about there being other crossings. As I understand it, those that will live on this site will have to walk down the broken pavements, past the cars that are on the pavement in order to get to the other crossings. So I was trying to avoid that. But I take your point, or at least I listened to your point. The other one I just wanted to mention, because it strikes me as a little bit bizarre, is you said that you'd be, or I think it is said within the narrative, within the commentary here, that the speed limit would be revisited on, an application could be made on occupation of the first house. That strikes me a little bit like shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted. I would have thought possibly it ought to be, some application should be made ahead of, potentially, when the building starts, not when the first house is lived in. Cannot that be the case?
I think that's a fair point, Chair. I don't see any reason why we cannot insist that that's done prior to commencement. The only caveat I will say with that is that any speed limit change is subject to traffic regulation orders, and there are statutory advertising and statutory processes that go along with that. Any order cannot actually be confirmed at planning stage because it is subject to separate legislation and separate decision-making processes. But there's no reason why we cannot commence that process at an earlier stage than first occupation, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris, for that. Appreciate your input. Yes, Gemma.
I've just double checked with Kenny. We could change in the section 106 that talks about the traffic order prior to first occupation. That could be changed to any development above slab level, because then that would allow the developer to do all the site clearance, etc. on the site, but above slab level would be the start of any dwelling on site.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Adrian, yes.
Yes, as we're talking about that particular point, and I thank you for your constructive response there too. I'm looking at where the gates that you're talking about and the 30-mile limit is going. It's immediately after a footpath. Now, it's not showing on here, but it was showing on the application we had previously, which we objected to and got turned down by the inspector. But there's a footpath that comes through. If you look at the landscape plan that we've got, there's a footpath that comes through that development and it crosses the road, and there is a lane just a little bit further along the road from where this waterworks is, this way. Would it be not more appropriate to have the 30-mile limit further along the road so that the crossing of that footpath is a bit safer for people, and also gives the chance for traffic to slow down to the 30 miles an hour before they actually get to these houses, rather than slamming on the brakes at that point? Is that a realistic or practical proposition?
I think in the context of this planning application, we would not necessarily require that. Whilst I don't disagree with the sentiment, there are statutory guidelines that we have to meet to implement speed limits, and depending on...
Chris, they are guidelines, and we're in a position to actually make decisions here that are different, and we have done so in the past with bus stops, which the guidelines are the bus stop should be in the traffic lane, and we prefer them to be in lay-bys. So I'm saying, could we make that decision on a more practical point, and being local and knowing what would be best for the locals, rather than national guidelines dictated to us by government?
I take your point totally, and as an officer, I'm here to recommend with what we would suggest with guidance and best practice. In this case, I think having the limit as shown on plan is probably pushing it to some extent to meet those guidelines as it is. I think extending it further, you then potentially create a compliance issue, which then can result in road, enforcement problems, and that can create a whole other range of issues. Kenny, did you want to say something there?
Thank you, Chair. Just on this point, I mean, again, it comes into the scenario where during the, if members are minded to support the recommendation, of course, it could open up a follow-up discussion with the highways team about where this gateway could actually be relocated. It's not part of this application, so it's not something you are endorsing today. It's something that would be part of a separate process with the Highways Authority involved, and it certainly is something that we could have that follow-up discussion to get something more clear-cut in terms of when we get the vehicles slowing down before we get to the site.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. The statutory advertising process for TROs would require public consultation, so all representations could be made there, and that could include suggestions for altering the extent of the speed limit in that regard, yeah.
Beth, Councillor Thruffle.
No, I was just concerned, and I think you've probably made my point irrelevant, but I was just concerned if you were going to move the crossing further east, that the people wouldn't be using it from the housing estate to get into the village. It would be better for the footpath, but possibly not for the residents when they were trying to, and there clearly isn't a pavement along the side of the road for the people who were coming from the footpath to reach the other side, as it were, where the footpath takes off again. But I think, as you say, these representations could be made at the right time later on.
Thank you. Well, I want to move to debate now. Ernie.
I was just to say, as I'm the nearest local member, do you actually want something on the table at some point?
Sorry?
Would you actually like something on the table? So I'm the nearest member of the committee to hold, to debate. A proposal.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Oh, right. Well, I'm happy to supply you with one.
Well, thank you. That was going to be my next question.
Right.
I want to go to debate, so I'm going to ask for a proposal. Yes, please.
Okay, we probably need a bit of fine-tuning. I'm uncomfortable. The more I hear about this, we've got debates about whether a mini roundabout is possible because we don't know whether the land's there. We're talking about the traffic gate by where that is. We've been told by the parish council that if we approve this, it would be a very hard entrance into Holt compared to the soft one they've got. We've been told about the pavements and the condition of them, how narrow they are, and how far the pub, the shops, the school, everything else is from this site. And I always hate deferrals because it seems that we've spent a lot of time getting nowhere. But I think on this one, we should actually defer it, A, to allow a site visit from the members of this committee, whoever they may be, come next year. But in the meantime, the highways people can look at the concerns that they've heard from the committee members and the public today. And also the mention about the affordable housing, which I think it was the owner of the company said he was quite happy to take on board. Again, perhaps a deferral would enable that to be sorted out. And we might have a different form of wording that would sort of keep the members of this committee happy. So I know it's not a very formal way of wording it, but I certainly think we should look towards deferral, Chairman. That would be my proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Foster.
I have serious concerns about a deferral. If a deferral is made, an appeal is made by the applicant, before we get to discuss it, we'll then have no say in it at all, and it'll be the inspector that makes all the
Well, let's
decisions.
just tease out a
Whereas
minute.
if we have a positive...
We've got a proposal. Is anybody prepared to second that? No, they're not. Right, well, I'm going to look for another proposal then, please.
I'm prepared to put my head on the block here.
Go on then.
Given the present situation, I believe very firmly that everybody who's spoken today has spoken wisely, and I understand the local concerns here. And I fervently didn't want the development on the other side of the road going ahead. And I think the inspector's decision was probably one of the worst decisions that have been made on Wiltshire Councils ever since it's been here. But being realistic and pragmatic, I can't see that any inspector is going to make any different decision on this development that's coming forward now. So I'd like, therefore, to propose that we do go ahead with this application. And I know that the locals won't be happy with that. But we also put in that the social housing occurs, and we also put in that the 30-mile limit goes in at an earlier stage than the first house being built. So it's there for the development. And yes,
and what, sorry?
The 2-year referral.
Yes, absolutely that.
Yeah. And it's difficult for me to make that decision, but this is one of the better developers that we have within the county. And when you look at the ratio of houses that's proposed on here for social and affordable, it's much more acceptable than the majority of applications that we've seen before. So there are pluses to this. And normally I wouldn't be wanting any development in rural locations like this, but I believe that we don't have a choice because we don't have the 5-year land supply. We'd be better off making a decision and getting the things we want in it rather than the inspector deciding what would be in it.
Yeah.
So that's my proposal.
Thank you. Any seconder, please?
Chair, before we get a seconder, I think it's important that I just clarify that there was a reference made earlier to restricting the development to 2-storey dwellings, and that would be something that you'd want to see in a resolution. So before we get a seconder...
I agree entirely.
Yeah, we did say that.
Thank you, Kenny. I've forgotten that.
Yes, just wait. We've got a seconder. James, did you want to speak to that? Gemma's got a list to go through in a minute. We'll just so we'll just tidy this up.
Thank you again. It's with a heavy heart, but we are in the predicament we are. And Kenny made a very interesting statement when he said it needs to be fully defended on appeal, fully defended. And we don't have the ammunition to fully defend on appeal. And if I thought we had anywhere near the ammunition to do so, I would definitely vote against this application, but we can't. So it's with a very heavy heart that I actually support Adrian's proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I'll come to you in just a minute, Ernie. Gemma.
I've got the changes to include the section 106 to include the social rent and the traffic order to be submitted before development is above slab level. I've got condition 2 to change the reserve matters to 2 years rather than 3. I've got a note to be added to condition 3 stating that any subsequent application should broadly accord with the submitted layout showing housing setback behind Melksham Road. I've got a condition on note 4 highlighting the constraints plan and landscape strategy purely relating to ecology and not landscaping. Councillor Carbon requested changes to the construction management plan to include no parking on the B3107 and the routing plan to require construction traffic to access from the east, and a change to informative 5 relating the development to relate to 2 stories.
So you're both happy with that?
I think that's a constructive approach, and I think we've then put an input in rather than relying on somebody else making the decisions for us.
Absolutely. And you're happy with that, James, as a seconder? Yeah. Councillor Clark, Ernie.
Sorry, Chairman, I was just going to remind you about the setting back that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Gemma's
But she's
said it.
covered that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beth, did you put your hand up?
Just to say that, again, it is with a heavy heart, but I agree with Councillor Foster that we have to, we're going to have to approve this one because it'll go through on appeal otherwise, and we will lose the advantages we have today of putting in our conditions that we would like to see met. And also just to point out that in terms of density, it is so much less dense, more appropriate to a village setting than the one opposite, which was approved but at appeal. Thank you.
Well, I'm bound to agree. I think the appeal decision on the Gladman site, the other side of the road, was shockingly poor. And if I was the appeal inspector, I would have been enormously embarrassed having made that the decision they did. But there we are. Ernie, you've put your hand up.
Just to clarify, Chairman, when the reserve matters came back, I think it was before, was it Western Area? For that southern site, the planning committee refused it because they were so disgusted with what was coming back, because it was nothing like what was being put forward.
Right. Well, that's interesting.
So
We refused the original one.
Yeah,
Yes.
they had got permission, but the detailed permission was refused. Whether they're going to appeal it or redraw it, who knows?
There you are. We refused the original one, of course. Steve Siddle's point was one that I raised at the last meeting. That is that we're just going to fall over each time the government comes up with something like this, then this committee may well be null and void. But we are in a horrible position today. Does any other member want to say anything, please? Councillor Britton, Richard, thank you.
Just to say that I think this is a dreadful application. Wrong style, wrong place. This is going to ruin Holt. And although I completely understand and recognise all the constraints the committee is under, my conscience, heavy heart or not, my conscience won't allow me to support this.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. Does anybody else have anything else they want to share? In which case, then I'm going to go to the vote then. You know the proposal, which is effectively what is on the papers in front of you with the addendum that Gemma's just written out, seconded by James. All in favour of that proposal, please. 6. And against. 3. So the proposal has been carried. Thank you for your time. And I think I'll call a comfort break. With the next application, so thank Gemma for her attendance this morning and welcome Verity. This is land off Freestone Grove, Westbury. Over to you then, please, Verity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is seeking outline planning permission to construct up to 40 dwellings with 2 new accesses, public open space, landscaping, provision of a play area, and associated infrastructure with all matters reserved. Therefore, this application is seeking to establish the principle of developing the site with specific details relating to the development to follow as part of a reserved matters submission at a later date. This proposal constitutes a development plan departure due to the housing being proposed on an unallocated site outside the established settlement limits for Westbury. Therefore, the proposal does not comply with CP1, CP2 or CP32 of the adopted Wiltshire Core Strategy, which is why this case is being presented to you as members of the Strategic Planning Committee in accordance with our scheme of delegation. The accompanying report for this item, as set out from page 91 of your agendas, details why officers consider this proposal to be acceptable and will be discussed during this presentation. Officers are recommending this application be approved subject to a Section 106 legal agreement and planning conditions as set out in Section 11 of the accompanying report. Those are from page 124 of your agendas. This slide shows where the red line is and it clearly shows that there is existing residential development on the western boundary and to the north with the knoll to the south, which is an existing cul-de-sac. The site forms an undeveloped parcel of Grade 3 agricultural land, which borders this existing residential development, which was known as Millbrook. And the site extends to 1.7 hectares, occupying a rectangular shape. So we've got the knoll to the south, and then on the eastern side we've got Coach Road, which is a single track road with limited passing places with open countryside beyond that on the eastern side. The site is located within Flood Zone 1 and is not shown to be in an area susceptible to groundwater or surface water flooding and does not fall within any landscape designations. The site is located within designated buffer zones associated with the Salisbury Plain Special Protection Area, the Greater Horseshoe Bats linked to the Bath and Bradford-on-Avon Bats Special Area of Conservation, and the site is also within the Grey Hatch Zone associated with the Trowbridge Bat Mitigation Strategy, which is associated with recreational impacts from new housing developments. This map just shows where the existing rights-of-way are to the site. They're located along the southern boundary of the site, but they fall outside of the red line for this application. So the proposal would be seeking the formation of 2 new access points, one from Freestone Grove to the north and one from Cheviot Road to the west, which are existing roads serving the Millbrook development. However, full details associated with these access points would form part of a future reserved matters application. As shown in this image, the application site, which is outlined here in red, is surrounded by existing residential development with land to the east, which is shown by this blue hatching being a site advance for future housing in the emerging Wiltshire local plan under the emerging policy 62, which if found sound by the planning inspectorate would result in this site being completely enclosed by residential development. The emerging local plan policy 62, which is known as Land at Bratton Road, seeks to allocate land for approximately 260 dwellings and the provision of 0.3 hectares of land for nursery provision. Whilst only limited weight can be afforded to this allocation at this stage, this does demonstrate that the council considers this to be a suitable location for future housing growth. this slide just provides a sort of concept plan. So this is an extract taken from the emerging plan, which shows the land at Bratton Road site, and it shows by this sort of green colouring where proposed residential uses would be, well, are seen to be indicatively located within that site plan. Again, this carries limited weight at this stage, but it just highlights the fact that the council does consider this sort of particular part of Westbury to be sort of a sustainable location for new growth. This slide illustrates the illustrative master plan for this current application. It is important to note that this drawing is purely for illustrative purposes only, but it demonstrates how the site could be laid out. And it's important to mention that this drawing hasn't been included within the approved plans list provided in condition 4 on page 126 of your agendas. It was purely just to show how the site could be laid out. The indicative master plan illustrates the sort of formation of two possible access points off the existing roads from the existing neighbouring residential development, forming a loop arrangement to which our Highways Department have raised no objection to, with the existing roads being considered to be of a sufficient width and form to accommodate the traffic associated with the development. Again, it's important to note that the internal sort of road layout isn't a matter to be considered as part of this application, and this sort of internal road layout is just sort of indicatively being shown on this master plan. The master plan also shows an attenuation basin in addition to permeable paving to be used across the site, which would be the two main SUDS features to manage surface water from the proposal, which our drainage team have found to be sort of acceptable in principle, subject to a more detailed drainage strategy as part of reserve matters stage. The proposal also includes the provision of an internal path to connect to the existing rights of way to the south, with public open space, a play area in that southeast corner, and a 10-metre wide back corridor along the eastern boundary. In terms of landscape character, it is appreciated that the site is currently a greenfield of undeveloped land, but it is located on that urban edge, or an existing urban edge of Westbury, and would be viewed within the context of the existing residential development. The council's highways officer does not consider the proposed development to be harmful to the wider character of the area, or to be sufficiently harmful to the important views of the Salisbury Plain escarpment to warrant a landscape-based objection. It is important to mention that this particular site was previously considered by the neighbourhood plan working group as a potential neighbourhood plan allocation site for approximately 30 houses. So that was DDH5. This is just an extract taken from the pre-examination iteration of the neighbourhood plan before it was made, which again just sort of shows that these two sites were potentially being considered for housing, but it is understood that these draft allocations were admitted after concerns were raised by Natural England on the value of the site for bats, and therefore were not included as part of the made plan. But this does reveal that the site was considered a suitable location for future growth by the neighbourhood plan working group. Sorry, it might not be the clearest drawing, but this has been sort of taken from the accompanying transport statement, which again sort of highlights the site in red and sort of demonstrates the accessibility of the site to existing facilities, including supermarkets, a primary school and the town centre, with the black route sort of indicating a pedestrian access, or a pedestrian route that would lead from the application site to the town centre. The transport statement confirms that the site is located to about a 1 kilometre distance from the town centre and about 2.5 kilometres from the railway station, which is located to the west, with there being local bus services within 200 metres of the site. Whilst only indicative at this stage, the submitted illustrative master plan does demonstrate that the site could be accessed through two access points connecting to the existing neighbouring residential development to the west and to the north. And it is appreciated that there have been some local concerns raised regarding the additional traffic that would be generated from this development, including during the construction phase. Our Highways Department considers that the existing roads would be suitable to accommodate the traffic posed by the development based on the existing road widths. The submission of a construction traffic management plan has been included within the suite of planning conditions, which should incorporate measures to minimise disruption to existing residents and to ensure the safety of those residents. The applicant was invited to provide an indicative routing plan just to demonstrate how a construction vehicle might be able to sort of access the site through the existing development. Again, this isn't fixed. This was just to have a look to see what a possible route might be. And our Highways Department do not foresee any significant issues arising from this, but this is obviously subject to the submission of a robust construction traffic management plan and details of sort of mitigation to safeguard existing residents. It is important to mention that this outline permission does not seek approval at this stage of how the site would be designed, laid out, or to confirm the internal road position, as these matters would be addressed as part of a reserved matters application. And as I think you heard this morning, the MPPF is clear that in paragraph 116, applications should only be refused on highway grounds if there is an unacceptable impact on highway safety or there would be severe residual accumulative impacts, and it is not considered that this proposal would lead to such impacts to raise a highway-based objection to the application. An ecological parameters plan was required as part of the HRA for the application to identify the ecological features of the site and to ensure that the bat habitat is protected. The proposal includes a 10-metre wide landscape dark buffer on the eastern edge of the development where lighting would also be restricted, and there's conditions posed to ensure that sort of any lighting from the proposed development, once the layout is confirmed at reserved matters, would not sort of have an unacceptable impact on that corridor, with that lighting on that particular boundary being restricted to 0.5 lux. The proposal also seeks to enhance on-site grassland, provide native planting throughout, provide log piles for invertebrates, and to introduce bat and bird boxes. The Council's Ecology Department drafted an appropriate assessment, which concluded no likely negative effects on the bat sac, which Natural England were consulted on, and subject to the mitigation measures being implemented, which have been included within the suite of conditions, no ecology-based objections are raised to the proposal. I've just got a series of site photographs just to show where the current application site. So this drawing is taken from so the proposed access point from Freestone Grove to the north. So that's where the existing development, and the access sort of would be coming in sort of through where a car's parked there. The other access on the west would be sort of located where these sort of like planters are, again with the existing development on either side. This photograph has been taken from the public right-of-way to the south, which is West 1, and this is looking towards the site. So you can see the existing development there to the north and along the western boundary, and that sort of just provides a kind of view of the existing site. This photograph is again taken from the public right-of-way to the south, and again you can see the existing housing sort of along that western boundary. This is taken from Coach Road, which is located to the east of the site, and you can see where the public right-of-way, so the entrance to that is there from Coach Road, again with sort of existing development of the knoll to the right-hand side of the picture, and the existing houses associated with the Millbrook development sort of to the west, the back there. This photograph is taken further north along Coach Road, again facing that western boundary, again with dwellings sort of visible along that northern edge and along that western boundary. This sort of demonstrates the sort of urban fringe character of the site. As previously mentioned, this proposal represents a departure from the adopted Wiltshire Core strategy due to the proposal representing speculative development on an unallocated site located outside the settlement boundary for Westbury. However, the emerging local plan sets out how the council should deliver new housing growth in the Trowbridge housing market area, which includes Westbury up to 2038. Within this, there is a need to provide a further 570 homes in Westbury, which this application would contribute towards. Again, as Gemma and Kenny have both sort of explained earlier this morning, following the government's recent changes to the MPPF in December and changes to how housing numbers have been calculated, the council has moved from a figure of 1,917 homes per annum to 3,525 homes per annum, which represents a 84% increase to the number of homes compared to previous calculations. Furthermore, these changes have resulted in the council needing to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply with a 5% buffer, which has resulted in a significant increase in the amount of housing the council needs to provide. These changes have impacted our current housing land supply figure, which is now around 2.03. It is considered that this proposal is located in a sustainable location, surrounded on 3 sides by existing residential properties, with the eastern side of the town being considered an acceptable location for future housing growth in the emerging local plan. This proposal would provide up to 40 dwellings with up to 12 affordable housing units, the benefit of which carries significant weight at a time when we need to boost our housing supply. So to conclude, section 11 of the report from page 124 sort of sets out again the changes to the MPPF and again details that the council now has to provide a significant increase in housing, and as a result the presumption in favour of sustainable development, also known as the tilted balance, applies as set out in paragraph 11 of the MPPF. In this case, there are no protection policies that would prevent the tilted balance being engaged, and there are no technical objections on which to refuse the application. It's considered that the provision of up to 40 additional dwellings would contribute towards addressing the council's housing shortfall and meeting affordable housing needs, which have been afforded very significant weight in the planning balance. Also, the site's location, access to public service links and services, transport links and services, and the economic benefits arising from the development, both in the short term and long term, and the contribution towards sale are given significant weight. Moderate weight has also been given to the Section 106 contributions, the provision of open space, play provision, bat habitat, and improvements to the Section 106. Improvements to the the public right-of-way to further south of the site. It is duly noted, however, that the proposed development would be on an unallocated site located outside the defined settlement boundary for Westbury, which represents a departure from our current core strategy. However, officers considered that the harms attributed to the plan conflict, disruption to existing residents during the construction phase, and the loss of agricultural land do not significantly outweigh the benefit of delivering new homes at this stage when we need to provide it. Therefore, limited weight has been afforded to such harms. Therefore, officers are recommending that this application be approved subject to Section 106 agreement and planning conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Verity. Appreciate that. Questions from members, please. Adrian. Councillor Foster.
That's all right, Howard. Please call me Adrian. I'll get Elizabeth to do it one day. 3 questions, really. What has changed now that this wasn't included in the local emerging plan, and you explained why before? What has changed since then that it's deemed that it should now be part of the emerging local plan, which is effectively what we would be doing if we passed it? The second question is, there's a coach road that goes along the whole side of it. Why is no access being given there? Is there a local reason for that? Because presumably when the emerging plan comes out on the other side of the coach road will be used anyway. But the third thing, which as you will have heard from my previous application, I'm more concerned about is, you mentioned that there are 40 houses, up to 40 houses, and we'll see if the developer asks for 60 when the time comes. But if it was 40% affordable, as you mentioned there, rather than social, but even if it was 40% of the affordable housing, that would be 16. But you're saying there's only 12 in this. Is there a reason why they're not going to comply with our new emerging plan, which does insist on 40%?
Thank you. With regards to the local plan, I did previously approach our colleagues in Spatial just to see why this site wasn't being included as part of that emerging plan policy for sort of housing on that eastern side. And I think at the time when sort of looking at site allocations was sort of being confirmed by Spatial, this site was looking to be progressed through the neighbourhood plan, which is why it wasn't sort of included as part of that sort of wider site allocation, I guess, and why this sort of site has sort of been kept away from that sort of wider land at Bratton Road application. I think during the sort of HRA process, both Natural England and our ecology team were sort of satisfied with the information that had been provided by the applicant and sort of the mitigation measures, which I think sort of overcome some of the initial concerns with the site allocation when it was being looked at as part of the neighbourhood plan, which I think is sort of why the application has sort of come in as it has, and why it sort of hasn't been formed as part of that sort of wider sort of emerging site allocation as part of the local plan. Does that answer your first question? Your second question, Coach Road is a single lane that has very limited car passing places, and I think there would be some concern, I don't know whether Chris would want to sort of add to that, but I think there would be some concern sort of having sort of an access coming off of that road to sort of serve the development here. And again, also the concept plan, which again, there should be a copy on your agendas, bear with me a second. Hang on. Sorry, bear with me. I thought I put a snip of the proposed. So what page within the agenda? Yeah, what I wanted to just point out is that the land at Bratton Road, so I could have just put the drawing up, that this potential site allocation, and again, it hasn't been confirmed, it hasn't gone through full examination yet, is actually showing the access to be sort of off Bircham Road to the south rather than through Coach Road. And again, I think there probably would be some highway harm in using such a narrow road to sort of access sort of additional housing from either this application or from that emerging site, which is why sort of alternative options have been sort of looked at to accommodate the access routes for those sites. In terms of your third question, the emerging plan carries very limited weight at this moment, and our housing team were happy to accept a 30% affordable housing limit on this proposal. So that's why we're not looking to deliver 40% affordable housing off this site, and why it's 30%.
That's very disappointing after the constructive conversations I've had with them, because they come to this meeting. They don't come as a housing officer to justify where they've done it, and we can't challenge it. And when I've spoken to them, they said that 40% would always be the norm unless there was exceptional circumstances. And nobody has mentioned any exceptional circumstances in this case. So I would again be reluctant to allow this to go through without a 40%, which is Wiltshire Council's preferred option.
All I would say on that is that I think in accordance with our current core strategy, I think with this site, it currently sort of recommends a 30% affordable housing limit, which is why, and given that that's the current policy that we're still determining applications against, that's why the 30% has been sort of put forward at this instance, rather than looking at that emerging policy.
As this is not an outline, it's purely outline, when it comes to full planning application, if the emerging plan has been approved, will we then have to insist on 40% at that point?
I'm not sure. I'm going to have to go to Kenny for that.
Thank you, Chair. Well, if an application comes in a full submission format, then the whole principle would be opened up again. So if we've got a adopted plan that requires the 40% affordable housing, the answer to your question would be yes. We would have to insist on 40%. But if it comes in as a reserved matters application following an outline, then the principle isn't open for reconsideration, and the terms of the Section 106 will still be the current position, which is the 30%. So just to clarify, Chair, some areas of Wiltshire requires 30% affordable housing, some 40%, which councillors are aware of, and Westbury is in the 30% area. So in terms of policy, Westbury requires 30%, not 40%. However, there is a scenario here that if this goes to Section 106 stage and the emerging plan becomes an adopted plan before a decision's made, bearing in mind that you're only granting a resolution today, that would be material change. And that would then trigger potentially bringing a report back to this committee for a further review, or, as you're the decision makers today, you can put in a clear trigger within the Section 106 that if this application is determined after a Wiltshire made plan has been adopted, then the requirements of that plan would apply.
Thank you, Kenny. I would hope that we would put that in.
Carol.
I just had a query on the net density of the housing. I noticed on the Holt one, 55 houses on that site, it was a net density of 18 per hectare. On this site, 40 houses, but it's 38 dwellings per hectare, which kind of suggests it's rather crowded. But I just wondered if in our design plan, which we just adopted last year, whether we had anything about numbers of housing per hectare, and also, is there an industry standard or best practice number? I was just curious about that.
Again, I think that, again, really sort of comes down to sort of the individual constraints of different applications and sort of what sort of buffers might be needed. Again, this one is quite different to the Holt one in as much that it's got quite a lot of sort of existing development sort of on three sides. And I think the 38 dwellings per hectare does seem to be sort of another figure that I've sort of seen in other applications sort of across the county. And again, it is important to mention this is only an up to sort of 40 dwellings. So again, knowing that they need to provide those sort of buffers around the existing hedgerows. We might see reserved matters that might see a slight drop in numbers, obviously not going beyond the 40 that this outline is sort of seeking to look at. In the report, again, it does sort of highlight what our sort of Wiltshire design guide sort of terms of distances between houses and in terms of garden sizes. So again, we would want to see that sort of being reflected as part of any future reserved matters application. Again, that sort of detail is really sort of to be considered as part of a reserved matters when we sort of have confirmation of what that sort of layout is going to look like, which isn't sort of confirmed at this stage.
Yeah, good question, Carol. Thank you.
But you're not aware of any industry standard or?
No.
I'm not, no.
Could I just ask similar question to the last application we looked at? Is there any indication that this will be, since it's an outline application, when it might be possible to deliver it, start construction?
I was going to ask the same question.
Again, I've got the similar conditions that Gemma had originally put on her committee report of sort of the 3-year restriction. Again, I could see about whether the applicant would be willing to sort of move that to a 2-year. So again, that's something that I can have a conversation with, a bit like what with the Gemma's application. But otherwise, it's still the 3-year as sort of set out within the committee report, which is the standard condition.
Kenny?
Can I take the unusual step of asking Tara or Ellen if we've got a developer here for this application?
No, we haven't, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, on that basis, I would say to the committee, as a decision maker, if you're minded to support this, then clearly in the scenario we're in for the housing land supply, you make the judgment whether you think it is necessary. If they're saying it's necessary to bring the housing for housing land supply, then let's make the call and say, let's not just slavishly apply the 3-year test. Let's say bring it forward 2 years, like the last case. I think it's well founded, and it's been argued at appeals previously that if a developer is serious in bringing a site forward, then let's place that as a requirement within any permission.
Thank you, Kenny. Yes, I'm disappointed the developer isn't here to answer that, so I think that's quite reasonable.
Yes, I just wanted to mention, I mean, it's a 2023 application, so it's been going around for a little while, so one would hope that at this stage they'd sort of clarified things. Thank you.
Thank you. James, Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you very much. Page 121, regarding drainage and flood risk. One of the paragraphs says the applicant replied to the LLFA's consultation request confirming that the scheme would deliver a reduction of the discharge rate for the 1 in 1 year event. And I'm not too sure what a 1 in 1 year event is.
Yeah, so I think that might have been a typo. Sorry, I think that should have read 100.
Because,
So
I mean,
apologies.
That's not really impressive, really. Thank you.
Would it be like the Malmesbury?
Sorry, thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Any more questions from the committee, please? No, in which case then, I'd like to go to our first speaker, Paddy Griffin. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for allowing me the time to speak. Having said that, I find it interesting that this meeting has been called with such little notice, booked during a working day and during the Easter holidays when the majority of the residents it affects are either at work or on their Easter holidays. I feel very passionately against this proposed build. It is our neighbourhood, our houses and our families that it's going to affect long term, and no consideration has been given to the impact of the build due to the construction traffic. It's not like the build is accessed off a main road with no neighbours. It is accessed through an established housing estate, past people's houses. Children, including my own, love to play on Freestone Grove, among other roads, on scooters and bikes, etc. If this build goes through, they will be unable to, as it is unsafe. I feel that this build is inappropriate and unsafe for all residents. As to bring an example, the tragic incident in Dilton Marsh last year, to use it as an example, where a child was killed on a wheeled car reversing, by a car reversing, because it wasn't seen due to parked cars. The field shouldn't be considered as a viable site due to its location. It was removed from the neighbourhood plan due to the habitat of bats, as previously mentioned. However, the owner has cut down, which isn't illustrated in the photos, has cut down all of the hedgerows surrounding the entire site, except on Coach Road. That hasn't been brought up in this. As already previously mentioned, there are approved builds on Westbury at Main Way and off Bratton Road, which don't go past people's houses. Although this field is private property, it is a green lung in the middle of a busy residential estate. And more proposed construction off Bratton Road, why not leave a vital green space within an already built up area and not force the current residents to endure more unwanted construction traffic? The committee report remarks very significant weight on the benefit of new housing for new residents. I think no thought has been given to the current residents. Why are we prioritising potential residents over current ones? We have endured 6 years of construction traffic. There have been many issues relating to standards of roads, drainage issues, which have led to the roads being dug up multiple times to rectify the same issues. The latest of which is starting next week to replace the ends of which road, which will be completed for the 3rd time. This has not been, which have not been adopted currently by the council due to these issues. Again, the report issues the benefit for future residents, mentioning the access for commuting routes. However, the road network is inadequate for the current number of cars and certainly cannot have construction traffic. As these are occupied houses by residents, they require parking for their own cars, and these parked cars will be on these access roads. And it's been noted in the report that there will be a stipulation where parked cars will not be allowed on those access roads. So where a current resident is supposed to park. Freestone Grove has been proposed as an access route construction traffic. It isn't wide enough for vehicles. For example, our bin lorries struggle on collection days. How is it going to be an access route? And also Buffalo Road is a pinch point, not wide enough for large vehicles since the new pavements have been put in. I urge councillors to object to this plan and preserve the green space within a built-up residential estate and keep our children and current residents safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paddy. Darren Nugent, please. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I don't think I can be as eloquent as my fellow speakers. I only found out about this last night, thanks to my neighbour. So this is just speaking more from the heart than anything else. My issue is that the development is predicated on the fact that it's piggybacking on Barrett David Wilson's estate management already. So the drainage and the roads, they're going to be doing it. The drain goes through that area. It's supposed to come out into Freestone Grove, and that's been blocked on a regular basis. And that's with like 2 or 3 houses. And it can't handle that at the moment. I don't think they've pressure tested it enough to do it. I don't think it's going to handle it. But the main thing is really the road access. I know it's great to say, oh yeah, you can get the cars through there. You know, the highways agency have had a look, it's fine. You can underestimate how bad the road layout is. It's a debacle. What's the name of your road?
Buffalo Road.
Buffalo Road is a terrible place. But coming into Buffalo Road from the roundabout, there's an area of road there which is so badly designed, I can only describe it as gladiatorial. It's dangerous, so people come flying around the corners. Yeah, so it's a bit in the top, sort of just off the roundabout. You can see that tiny little curve there. Yes, there. You can't drive around there without coming out into the other lane. It's really, really quite dangerous. So far, people have been saying about the children there and how people are going to get run over. Nothing's happened yet, thank God. But it may well happen. I don't know how they're going to get construction traffic through there. They struggled getting construction traffic through when there was no pavements and you could drive up onto the verges without any problem. And now we've got parked cars everywhere and it's not going to do it. Now, Freestone Grove is a little cul-de-sac. Now, I know the name of every person in that cul-de-sac for the first time since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. All the kids play in the road. This is going to destroy that. And like Paddy mentioned, they've ripped out all the mature hedgerows already. They didn't care about that. They don't care about coming here to defend their plan in front of everybody. They just quite happily just go, yeah, blasé, this is going to get through. And I'd really like it not to get through. The access is there, but it's not enough. It will never be enough. You get one parked car in the wrong place, nobody's going to get into that site. It's bad enough at the moment. I drive a tiny little car and I have to reverse back to let people through, and there's issues all the time. It's a constant stress. And it's great. On paper, fantastic. Have a drive round there at any time of the day. Just see what it's like. It's almost impossible. And they still haven't finished what they've done properly. So I don't know what else I can say, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
Thank you, Darren. Point taken. Councillor Philip Harcourt, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I speak on behalf of Westbury Town Council in my capacity as a town councillor, but also the Deputy Chair of the Neighbourhood Plan Committee and Deputy Chair of the Highways Planning and Development Committee. Westbury Town Council is vehemently opposed to this application, which it believes is inappropriate, unnecessary, and even premature. The applicant has relied upon a draft allocation of the site in an early iteration of the Westbury Neighbourhood Plan, then for 30, not the 40, houses under what was then policy DDH5. That policy was to be read in conjunction with policy DDH4 for a further 65 houses on Bitham Park. At regulation 16 stage, the DDH4 allocation had to be removed because Wiltshire Council decided that they wanted to select it as a site for a special needs school. So we lost 65 of our allocated houses. And then on DDH5, this is the application site here, we lost that on the grounds of Natural England objecting to its site as it's an important bat foraging habitat. The Town Council was then extremely disturbed that following the application here and the applicant's tree survey report, approximately 75% of the perimeter hedgerow and habitat was destroyed by the applicant or by the landowner. It's very difficult to find out which was behind it because I think each blamed the other. But that was an appalling massacre of habitat. So it makes me sick to think here the applicant saying all the wonderful things they're going to do about replacing bat habitat when they've already desecrated what was there. I just don't know how they're going to deliver an appropriate biodiversity net gain when the baseline has been 75% destroyed. And I just think this is a very, very cynical process that this application has followed. The outline application fails to address the important issues of access and of highways, construction management, biodiversity, as it's deferred those for later determination. But these were all issues that were raised by objectors and residents. 40 houses and 1/3 more than previously promoted is 1/3 more than previously promoted in the draft neighbourhood plan. And we've already heard councillors questioning the density on here. At the neighbourhood plan stage, we looked into density, and when it was, before it was objected to by Natural England, we felt 30 was the maximum number of houses. And I'm still of that opinion. The red line drawing, which you have on page 92, which conveniently is up on the screen at the moment, is incorrect and highly misleading, as its errors conceal the real access issues, narrow streets and tight junctions. If you look at roughly in the middle of that thing, there's a splay on a corner there. That splay does not exist. They show it as if that'd be very easy for construction lorries to come in and swing around that corner. They cannot. Only yesterday, we had a low loader with some earth-moving equipment to do some of the tarmacking there, and he struggled to get out of there. He pulled in there and offloaded there, and he couldn't get his construction vehicle out. And this is repeated across the whole estate, particularly on that route. You've heard about the further up north from that, the junction between Mays Drive and Buffalo Road. That is impossible even for two small cars to pass in opposing. So opposing domestic traffic at the junction of Buffalo Road and Mays Drive and with Cheviot Road already causes major issues. There's no prospect of construction traffic utilising these junctions without major inconvenience or danger to residents, especially to young children who, have you heard, play safely and happily in some of the streets. I might add, some of the reason they play in the streets is that there was a condition on the Millbrook development that the play area would be open before 75% of the houses were occupied. That point was reached over 3 years ago, and still that has not been enforced by the planning officers that should have been open. And this is where the residents have little reliance upon conditions being pushed by officers to ensure that things decided in this committee actually happen. We've also seen a comment in the officer's report that the applicant is suggesting that in order to facilitate construction traffic, they will ban on-the-street car parking during the construction phase. So what this application means is that 100+ residents will be told that for 2 years they will not be allowed to pull up outside their houses, and that is simply unacceptable. And I'm sure none of you would be happy if somebody came along and told you you couldn't stop outside your house to disabled visitors, elderly relatives, letting children out close to the front door. All of that would be banned. And I think that just highlights the failings of this application. I think a lot of these constraints would best be made clear to members of this committee through a site visit before any decision is made. Because a lot of these things look, as I pointed out, might look fine on a plan, but when you actually see it in reality, it's a different matter. Residents are concerned at the construction access being via Freestone Grove, which is a small residential cul-de-sac which is not sufficiently wide to access the site at only 5 metres in places, especially, especially for construction purposes. Even in the draft neighbourhood plan, the Town Council requested alternative access to the site for construction purposes and believe that there are several opportunities that we discussed with the applicant in this case, and they declined to follow up on any of them. Details of construction management should have been provided to address these concerns at the consultation phase, particularly for the access to the construction traffic. The development depends upon roads through Millbrook that are not suitable for traffic without major disruption to residents. Millbrook is served by a network of minor residential streets which do not lend themselves to becoming through roads for the proposed development. The resulting additional traffic would change the character of Millbrook and the dynamics of the community to the detriment of the residential amenity and potentially highway safety. Residents are unhappy to see construction management access left for reserved matters consent and monitoring by officers. For 6 years, residents have suffered from the failure of the council to police adherence to the Millbrook Construction Management Plan and to enforce developers' planning obligations. In 2021, this council refused an application in Trowbridge on the basis of it was unacceptable in view of its failure to fully demonstrate how and when it would integrate with the wider allocation. This is another...
Councillor Harcourt, can I ask you to bring your
Just wrapping
remarks
up.
to a
One
close?
paragraph to go.
Thank you.
This is another identical situation. We would respectfully request members to vote against the application, at least until acceptable construction access solution is arrived at. The application site would serve a better purpose as a green lung, the heart of a larger development, including the local plan proposal for 250 houses to the east. Is it really worth upsetting 600 plus council taxpayers just to add a handful of new houses to the housing supply pot? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Many thanks, appreciate that. So our local member, please. Good to see you, Councillor Gordon King. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can I say how nice it is to see you back on your feet? Very good. So I would also like to thank Verity for her report. And I also note that the recommendation at the head of the report and will be as brief as possible in my reply to that. Okay. I do not expect that any of you would like to hear an argument against that recommendation, especially as no statutory consultee has raised an objection. However, you should know that it is a deeply unpopular application. Residents of Freestone Grove and adjacent groves, though they thought they were moving into a quiet cul-de-sac. That cul-de-sac was always close to the building site, and for years upon years, and until only recently, has peace after construction allowed anything like normal living. This application plunges them right back into the disruption of construction, disrupting their lives for at least the next 3 years. They wonder, and I wonder, why Robert Hitchens did not have the foresight to include this application in the original indicative plan for Millbrook. If they had, it might have been built first and no one would have been inconvenienced again. If they had, beg your pardon, consequently, they did not. I do not, and the council do not appreciate the scattergun approach to planning. It is unnecessarily disruptive to people's lives, as you have heard. Residents of Freestone Grove are rightly concerned that the road networks at Millbrook are not wide enough for construction traffic, as you have heard. The report acknowledges the variation of widths, but suggests that overall they provide the minimum width allowed. That minimum width does not consider the number of hard right-hand turns in an overcrowded space caused by on-street parking and children playing. Residents have already experienced an excess of construction affected living, and they do not deserve any more. Construction traffic, on-street parking and children playing do not mix. I agree with the resident who highlighted the possibility of the emergence of a loop system that encompasses Freestone Grove and Cheviot Road that would produce an unacceptable logjam at the junction with Buffalo Road. This is unacceptable. The housing density for this application is 38 dwellings per hectare, of up to 40 dwellings, whilst the density for 55 houses in the previous application at Holt is only 18 dwellings per hectare, which is or which is not correct. I contend that 38 dwellings per hectare is too great a density for this small plot, which is enveloped by the historic Coach Road, and it is historic. If this was a building, it would be listed. The report also makes the point that this is also known as Site DDH5, as identified by the Westbury Neighbourhood Plan, along with another site, DDH4, nearby, but both sites were withdrawn, leaving Westbury no housing allocation. The report does not mention that DDH4 was removed by Wiltshire Council for the building of a school for SMEH affected children, or that Westbury Town Council removed DDH5 when strongly advised by Natural England that DDH5 is a site for significant ecological interest. Westbury Town Council considered that such a vision of this site would benefit the location, as it would become an oasis of biodiversity and ecology, net gain in a crowded spaces of overdevelopment. We regret that now Natural England saw fit to remove that objection. We cannot currently offer a 5-year housing land supply, so the tilted balance of the NPPF applies. However, it should be recognised that the tilted balance does not trump the protection of localism provided by neighbourhood planning. It merely forces a rebalancing of the relative weights of decisions. Western Town Council placed a high priority on this area as a place of ecological net gain and should provide sufficient weight by itself to counter any tilted balance. And as you have heard previously, that ecological net gain was further weakened by the destruction of the site by the applicant himself. Chair, I object to this application for 2 reasons. First, on the grounds that the development of the site does not outweigh localism or the obvious net gain in biodiversity and ecological growth. And that secondly, that the stated housing density of development is too great for the size of the plot, contrary to Wiltshire Council's core strategy, sections on climate change and high quality development. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. I appreciate that. Chris, I'm going to come to you first, if I may, because there's a number of highways implications there. On the face of it, this access route does look pretty catastrophic. I'm surprised it's perhaps had the go-ahead it has, but perhaps you'd like to explain that.
Yeah, of course. So the Millbrook estate is obviously a fairly new estate. The roads are residential roads by nature. They're built to modern residential road design standards. Generally, they're of a width of 5.5 metres. There are some variation with regards to that across the route towards the site. I think there was 2 main issues raised with regards to traffic. I think firstly with regards to traffic from the development once the development's built. I think the 5.5 metre wide residential roads would be sufficient to accommodate the additional traffic generated by 40 additional dwellings. That's notwithstanding the bends and the turns and the narrowings within the estate. I'm of the view that that would not create an unacceptable highway concern. What seems to be more of a contentious issue is access for construction traffic. Now, I think, as Verity mentioned, it's an outline application with all matters reserved currently, and subsequent submissions, we would be expecting a construction traffic management plan to be submitted. That would include swept path analysis for vehicles accessing the site to demonstrate that that route is achievable without causing damage to the highway or private property. I think in general, it will inevitably cause disruption to local residents. I think that's unavoidable. But whether it would cause an unacceptable highway safety issue, in my view, I don't think it would. I think there's certain measures that we can ensure are included within a construction traffic management plan that would mitigate any potential safety issues. For example, standard mitigation measures within a construction traffic management plan would be suspending parking. I know that's not popular. We would be heavily led by the developer with regards to their requirements for that, and that would be led through the size of vehicles that they would be using for deliveries and where pinch points would be required. So generally, we'd be looking around the bends where you would hope that parking doesn't occur anyway or infrequently. The parking would also be suspended with the use of police cones is generally the way that it tends to be restricted in these circumstances. Those cones can be, those cones would have a time limit associated to that, so they could be removed during sort of mornings and overnight to allow residents to park overnight in those areas and just restrict during the delivery hours of the development. Other mitigating measures would include the size of delivery vehicles. So we could restrict the size of the vehicles delivering to the site. Now, there will be a limit to that. You know, we're not going to be able to get, you know, transit vans only, for example. But what we could prevent is large articulated vehicles, such as, you know, 16-metre long plus articulated vehicles from accessing the site with only fixed axle vehicles being used. They would then be more of a comparable size to a refuse collection vehicle. Which obviously is already accessing the site to collect refuse and recycling. We would also expect deliveries to be staggered so that there's not two-way delivery vehicles, so they do not conflict. So only when one vehicle is in the site, you know, and looking to exit, another vehicle is not entering at the same time. And we would also ensure that, that any of those vehicles did not conflict within the highway network. Like I say, I think there is undoubtedly going to be a residential amenity impact to this, but I think any safety implications from a highways perspective can be satisfactorily mitigated.
Thank you. Kenny.
Thank you, Chair. I think the other option that does exist, which did also exist for Warminster. So the councillors that sat on this very committee that determined the urban extension of Warminster, there was a site not too dissimilar to this, where a developer would have to go through an estate. And as part of the negotiations that I had with the developer, I said, have you approached landowners for a temporary haulage route to avoid the existing estate? Now, it's not something as part of this application because it is a future requirement that the developer will have to submit to this council for its approval. But in the scenario that they do come forward and we assess what they submit and don't consider the estate to be suitable, then we could, as a committee today, force their hand to say, you really should be approaching the landowner to the east to look at a temporary haulage route, purely for a construction purpose. It's not something that you're assessing today in any case. It's just something that we're flagging up to the developer that we've got concerns potentially about the existing roads being used for construction vehicles. There is the scenario that Chris has mentioned about restricting the size of the vehicle. That might or may not be something the developer has even considered. But if they were to consider a temporary haulage route, then they wouldn't be likely to be restricted to a size of a vehicle. It would just be getting that third-party agreement to get down Coach Road or through the land that's allocated in the local plan. It would require, obviously, a submission to the council to see that it would be fit for purpose. So whatever comes forward, my suggestion to the committee is to say a route would be needed to make this deliverable. A developer will want to convince us that their submission, their solution, is workable. Now, I don't disagree with the local residents to say that the layout of that estate isn't ideal for 40 more houses. And I think a developer would be ill-advised to think that, I mean, they're not here today, unfortunately, and I don't know the reasons why not, but if the principle of 40 houses, or up to 40 houses, can be stomached for this site, then the construction is a future requirement that the developer will have to satisfy this council. And it is the type of application that you as a committee could say to officers, you want that submission brought to this committee to make a decision on. It's not usually the case that we bring those types of submissions, but if this committee is so concerned about what a developer comes up with in terms of all the assessments that would need to be done for the estate road to prove that the construction route through that estate is achievable, if that's what they come up with, then this committee can make the decision today that that type of application has to come back to this committee to make a decision. But my point is, like I made for Warminster, to the developer, go and speak to the landowners that are near your site, because there's clearly a temporary haulage route option that exists. And I don't know the discussions that the neighbourhood plan group had with this landowner, but we've got a developer here, we've got an applicant. They may well force that sort of narrative, that discussion further along the lines to get some reasonable outcomes. So all I would say, councillors, is that the construction traffic is a future matter. You're not making a call on it today. It's the principle of the site in terms of delivering potentially up to 40 houses. There would have to be a decision to be made on what route is to be taken to deliver any houses, and it's entirely within this committee's decision-making powers to either say, let's leave it to the highways officer and planning officers, or if you want to say that application has to come back to this committee for a committee determination.
Thank you, Kenny. That's been very helpful. I've seen you, Adrian. I'll come to you in just a minute. Verity, yes.
There was just a couple of other points that were sort of raised that I just thought I'd just sort of cover off to do with the hedgerows and ecology matters that I thought I'd just cover off, if that's okay. I fully appreciate that some of the hedgerows had been removed off the site, and I know that the tree officer had been sort of tasked with investigating that. Unfortunately, she's been away the last few weeks, she's out of the office, and I haven't been able to sort of get an update on where that's going, because I know that she had sort of been tasked with looking into that. However, the tree officer had said that she wasn't convinced that a significant amount of hedgerow had been removed, and raised no objections to the proposal, with landscaping being a matter to be addressed as part of a reserve matters application. Again, there are some conditions associated with that recommended within the report. The proposal does include additional tree planting within the existing hedgerows and sort of across the site, even though it is sort of acknowledged that there would be some loss of hedgerow just wherever those sort of access points will be once that's sort of fixed again at a reserve matters stage. A tree officer was happy that with the information that had been submitted to date, noting that landscaping would be a matter to be addressed as part of a reserve matters. In terms of the existing hedgerows, Again, our ecologist obviously picked up on the fact that some of those hedgerows had been removed, but was satisfied that there was sufficient space within those existing boundaries to reinstate hedgerows and for that to be managed for biodiversity. And again, that can be sort of matters that we sort of robustly consider as part of a reserve matters application. Also, the proposer was seeking to provide sort of a species-rich grassland, which would help provide prey species for bats, in addition to reptiles and amphibians. So again, the ecologist was quite happy with the sort of mitigation measures that have been put forward with the application, which again have been secured by condition within the report.
Thank you, Verity. Adrian.
Yes, it's just a technical point, really. And I don't know if Kenny remembers it, but there was the case that's mentioned earlier in Trowbridge, whereby we declined the application because we didn't think the access through the estate was sufficient or adequate. But the difference there was that there was a spatial plan and this land was part of it, and we conditioned that they had to be part of that spatial plan and fit in with it and wait. And the inspector came down on our side when they appealed it and agreed that they would have to do it in the right way. And I don't see any reason why this one shouldn't fit in exactly the same bit. I know it's part of an unadopted plan that we're looking at here, rather than an adopted plan, which is the difference between the Trowbridge one. But this is not part of the adopted plan either, or the local plan. And so I think the appropriate route here would be to say, and I think they are good, genuine concerns that the residents have on this matter, that I take on board what you said, Kenny, about the coming to an agreement, and also the officer very kindly pointed out that Coach Road isn't sufficient and a better road would be put in. And just thinking logically, this application should wait until there is an adequate route to get there. And I think Kenny's given a short-term measure for it, but I would prefer to see this development coming together with the other one and being part of a larger strategic plan, rather than this piecemeal approach and taking advantage of the present situation. I personally think the inspector would support us on this one, and I see no reason why we should object on that basis.
Rob, Councillor Ewell.
Thank you, Chair. I get rather concerned when established hedgerows are removed, particularly just prior to a planning application, because along with the hedgerows is the habitat that goes with that. Was the developer trying to hide something that now doesn't exist because it's moved on? There's obviously no way that we're going to find that out. The other point, again, I'd like to reiterate what others members are saying, is this transport route. I mean, it'd be a nightmare, to be honest. I don't see why. I mean, have we considered the coach road being used? Because it's pretty easy access to the coach road. I know it's a narrow road, but some form of traffic control could easily be established to manage the traffic, plus in their management plan, transport management plan, they could actually have assigned delivery times to make it easy. But to get that traffic away from the main road, the residential roads, I mean, it's essential in my book.
Absolutely. Yeah. Councillor Threadford.
Can I just ask, please, Verity, at the very south west of the site, there is not terribly well seen in that particular map, but there is a little strip of land along the side of the houses to the left that goes straight to Bitham Road, and I just wonder if that would be possible as it looks like scrubland on Google Street View, whether it would be possible to use that as a construction thing, or is that not within the
And not all of that's within the applicant's ownership. So again, we are sort of fixed with what land the applicant has control over in terms of where possible routing can be. The applicant sort of has sort of shared blue line plans, but again, they don't have the right sort of access route to be able to sort of join to the existing a sort of highway towards the south of the site to enable sort of an alternative to be explored, unfortunately. So we are sort of tied with that sort of red line and what lands within the applicant's control.
Yes, it's unfortunate, isn't it, that they can't get permission to use that, because it would be, at least in the short term, a much less troublesome to the residents. Thank you.
James, Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Highways officer mentioned about having one-way delivery through the estate. And I was thinking, if you can manage and monitor one-way delivery through an estate, surely you could do it on the road on the east. Thank you.
Just come back on that, Chris. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on Coach Road, really, because it's been raised a few times and I haven't said anything on it yet. I mean, in terms of access for long-term development, it's not something that the Highway Authority would recommend or promote, because it is a narrow single-lane road. There's also, what is not clear on the site plan, there is a low and narrow bridge to the north of the site, which would sort of prohibit access probably for construction from that direction. Notwithstanding that, as Kenny suggested, there is an option, certainly from the south, that a haul road may be feasible. It would be challenging as well, due to the width of Coach Road, and I don't know the width of it off the top of my head, but it's probably going to be around the 3 metre mark. So with large vehicles as well, making any turns, there is potential damage to the highway in that respect, which is a further consideration. So it's not as easy as it may seem on plan to access via Coach Road, but it is an option nonetheless.
I'll come to you both in just a minute. Kenny.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder that the illustrative construction traffic plan is not a detailed plan that the applicants are asking the committee to determine. It's their suggestion that the routing could come through the estate. I would just reiterate that there may be another option. I asked the same question you did, Councillor, about that option for the southwestern corner many weeks ago, and the applicants came back and said they don't own it, so they don't have control over it. But that doesn't stop them approaching that landowner to see if they can get that temporary route through. And I secured it with Persimmon and for Warminster, not without troubles, but we ultimately got it. And as Chris said, Coach Road may be an option, or the land to the east that's allocated in the emerging local plan could be the option. It's options, and because it's a future requirement that the developer will have to secure this council's approval for, I would just suggest that you don't just refuse the whole application, because that is a next step that would have to be approved by this council. The construction route isn't part of this application. It's clearly part of making this scheme deliverable, and unless they convince the council the route that they come up with is appropriate and safe, then they will struggle to get the site approved, ultimately, if they don't come through with the requisite information. So that's my suggestion to you, councillors, that we've got an application here where there is, again, follow-up applications. It's just the principle, unlike the Holt application that had the accesses in detail. This isn't. This is just purely principle for the site for housing.
Hang on, Beth, I'll come back to you. James.
The real issue really for me is the access. I mean, this is the absolute keystone to this whole development.
Yes.
And I think really it's of such importance that I would like to see it to come back to this committee. I'm happy in principle that the actual plot of land can be used, although I still think it's overdevelopment, but it is absolutely crucial that it's not developed through that estate. So I'd like to see it come back. Thank you.
I agree. I'll come back. No, hang on just a minute, Adrian. I've seen you. Richard, Councillor Britton.
Nothing could persuade me that the current proposed access is sensible. It would involve massive disruption to a great many existing residents, and we really shouldn't impose that on them. As long as the red line includes that access route, I would have to vote against this. And therefore, I think the idea of a deferral to allow the applicant to consider options to that would present a way forward. And if you like, Chairman, I'll move that.
I might come back to you in a minute on that then. Buff. Councillor Buff. Okay, Adrian, Councillor Foster.
Yes, I'm with the discussion about transport, obviously, all the way, but I am equally concerned, as was Carol, and I think Gordon is as well, about the density. And I think 30 houses, as was in the local plan originally when it was DDH5, I think, is more appropriate. And I think I'd like to have that enforced as well. And then if we did the 40% housing, it would be 12 as well anyway. This is quite a dense area of housing. So therefore, there is a reason why it should be denser than the Holt one. It is an urban development, but 40 is just too many, whereas 30 would be much more appropriate.
Right, I'm going to come back to Councillor Britton then, for Richard, for your proposal, if I may, your motion.
Then I move that this is deferred to allow the applicant an opportunity to consider alternative access proposals. Is that okay?
Yep, that's okay with me.
Do I have a second?
Do we have a seconder?
Sorry, can you
We're-
put your
we're
mic
not-
on?
Yes, sorry. We're not concerned about access for when the houses are built quite the same as we are for construction, but I think if we said appropriate access for construction needs to be provided, which would meet Kenny and the highways need. It
You're
just
happy
that
with
the
that?
Holt one came up with the right answer to bit right from the beginning. If it was one presented to us with the right answer at the beginning, then we would be in a better position.
Yeah, okay. So you'd be prepared to second it on that basis?
The word appropriate, is it?
As appropriate. Right. Yes,
Can I
I'm going to
ask
come
for
to...
clarification, because Councillor Foster previously referred to 40 houses being too much. If you're voting for a motion solely to defer for the applicant to come back with information on an appropriate routing for construction vehicles, does that mean that this motion is purely on construction vehicles?
Well, no, I'm thinking that we ought to include the rest as well.
If there's support within the committee to say, to come back with an appropriate construction route and appropriate number of housing, which we deem as 30, then I'd be happy to support that.
You'd be happy with that?
Well, in terms of the application, it does give you the option, because the application is for up to 40. It's not rigid, it's not 40. So you're not in the scenario where you're asking the applicant to make a material change. They are setting the bar themselves as 40. So in terms of that motion, that's certainly something officers can work with councillors.
Thank you. James, did you want to come back with something?
Just briefly, while we have the opportunity, I think we should do both at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely right. I agree. I'm just going to put a bit of a spanner in the works, because is it possible at this stage to put in 2 years instead of 3? I'll just ask
Sorry.
Kenny, sorry.
Yes, again, that would apply to this, and we could have that discussion with the applicant,
Yeah.
so that when it comes back to this committee,
Would
we
you
can
be
have
happy
a
if I-
clear response.
Yeah. And you'd be happy to second that, Adrian? Okay. I'm not comfortable with deferrals, but I don't think we've got a lot of choice with this one, because I think it's a muddle as it stands at the moment, and there's just too much that hasn't been addressed. So I'm going to go to the vote on this then. Are we all aware of what it is? Have you got it there? Have you come from Verity? Oh, Sarah, did you want to come back on something?
Sorry, Chair. I realise the direction of travel, but it's just sort of incumbent upon me to mention about the right of appeal for non-determination if we defer. But obviously members are fully aware of that when they're making their decision, but I do just have to mention that to you.
Well, I'm hoping it will be back here before it gets that far.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Thank you, Chair.
And given that there is a previous one where the inspector did decline it because there
Yes.
wasn't appropriate access, I think we're in strong ground on this one.
So I think under the circumstances, I'm comfortable with the proposal and the second, with those three provisos added in there. So I'm going to go to the vote then, please. All in favour, please. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, officers. Thank you, members of the public and Westbury Town Council. And once again, thank you all for your indulgence with me over the last electoral cycle, and all the very best to you all. Thank you. Thank you.